The Shoreless Ocean by Shrikrishna Kashyap.
First Publisher's Note. I have the pleasure in placing in the hands of discriminating students of life this little tract on the riddle of life, wrapped in a mystery authored by Shrikrishna Kashyap of Rishikesh, India. Though of India, Swamiji belongs to the world. The tract comprises talks given by Swamiji to a select audience. I am not a scientist nor a Vedantist, but an onlooker of life in general. If I have ventured to publish these talks, it is because of my deep regard for the Swamiji, stemming from my long but intermittent association with him. Though venerated as Swamiji by all who know him, he is not a caveman. He is a fully integrated person, living a balanced life in the relative world. He is an introvert and an extrovert in excelsior. He is a true analyst of the panorama of life, affording glimpses into the subtle incrustations which man has inherited in the long course of his evolution in human society, the indwelling divinity alternating with enormous animality. Religion, which was a civilizing force in the early history of man, soon petered out, and science and technology have since gripped the human mind. Even organized religion became a source of discord amongst sections of its own followers, and internecine intolerance and saber-rattling stalked sizable regions of the globe. The advance of science and technology has contributed enormously to creature comforts of man, but insecurity and fear have gripped mankind as never before. The United Nations and its agencies are trying to foster many ameliorative schemes to bring succor to the suffering humanity, but alas, man groans under the weight of his intellect. His mind and body can no more bear the stresses and strains of the tempo of life ushered in by the pace of world events. There is evident a maladjustment in man and his environment. The predatory man has taken more from nature than he has given back. Pollution and ecology stare man in his face. The growth of man's brain has outpaced the growth of his mind. His mind has remained static. This hiatus between sporadic benevolence and utter depravity, opulence and greed go together. Squalor and frustration are spreading apace. If man is to be saved from impending doom, he has to be tackled deftly as an individual and put on the road to recovery. The natural instinct of man to attain happiness as distinct from temporary sensory pleasures has to be fostered and developed. He has to be re-educated into his inborn divinity and lifted out of the present morass into his legitimately sublime self. An honest man is the noblest work of God, said Alexander Pope, the 19th century English poet. Man must work his way back to deserve this appellation. Life on this globe is a dexterous exercise. Whilst partaking of its pleasures, we must not lose sight of the source of real happiness, the supreme intelligence and love from which life has emanated. Can the Bhagavad Gita, with its teachings of moderation in everything, unity of life, sense of duty, service of fellow beings, and constant remembrance of God, guide the erring humanity? That God dwells in everything, animate and inanimate, should awaken us to our heritage. The techniques of God remembrance may vary from individual to individual, as no two men are exactly alike, physically, temperamentally, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. If this little tract provokes the reader to self-analysis and readjustment of his personal life, it will have served its purpose eminently, and his changed and self-illuminated life will light the path of other travelers on the road. R. S. Gavankar, Mumbai, India, 1978.
Chapter 1, A Planetary Peril, The Worldly Personality. Summary. The net result of centuries of so-called human evolution is the individualized achievement of a worldly personality, capable of carving out a niche in a restricted locale of the world. These worldly personalities collectively represent the sum total of learned ignorance. They maintain a self-centered, fragmented view of progress divorced from the whole of humanity. In spite of the precarious situation in which the world finds itself, people still cling tightly to these misconceived ideas of progress and patterns of survival, fiercely upholding separative interests, false security, and egotistical isolation. The toll of these misconceptions accrues in personal misery and collective suffering, as well as an overwhelming restriction, oppressing mental freedom and creativity. A meditation. Turn to the east. Look at the marvel of the sunrise. The whole of nature is engrossed in serene contemplation. The birds, the trees, the plants, the flowers, the grass, the rivers, the mountains, all are in a state of empathic projectivity reflecting the mood, the texture, the color, the moment, and the beauty of nature. There is no distance, there is no division. Go back to it, lose yourself in the numinosity of silence. This is meditation, the supreme awareness. To lose oneself, the self created and nurtured by thought, the world, the society, is meditation. To gain and strengthen oneself for pelf is degeneration. We are taught to meditate in isolation, in seclusion, in caves, and in grottos. To turn away from life is to turn away from actuality. Everybody is positively doing it. Why? Is it because we are cornered by problems? Is it because of doubts and fears of something we do not want to face? Without question, the situation is far beyond our capacity to tackle. But is it so bad as to make us slaves of our own whims and fancies? Is it because we are cornered by problems? Is it because of doubts and fears of something we do not want to face? Without question, the situation is far beyond our capacity to tackle. But is it so bad as to make us slaves of our own whims and fancies? There are problems in every aspect of life. The entire humanity is stalked by problems. Everybody has problems in one way or the other. The ruler and the ruled, the pauper and the affluent, the priest and the politician, the beggar and the rich, the monk and the householder, the depraved and the benevolent. No one can deny this universal fact. No one can escape from the grip of problems unscathed. From birth to death, man has to face problems of different magnitudes. Childhood has the problem of survival and growth. Youth has the problem of progress and expansion. Old age has the problem of decay and death. Although man has no control over birth and death, he has a say in the affairs of life. But fears have an even greater sway. It is generally known that man creates problems by trying to ensure comfort and security, passing through these with pain and jubilation, and ending up with care and frustration. Even well-wishers who try to immunize the world from problems end up in problems. Birth and death, the two extremes, are not within the realm of choice. The beginning and the end, manifestation and dissolution, abide in the unknown, whereas the long journey between birth and death resides in the known. When man comes into the world, he brings nothing extraordinary except a frail body, an innocent mind, and a childlike heart. When he disappears from the scene of the world, he takes nothing noteworthy except, perhaps, the traces of deeds. The interval between coming and going is saturated with desires. In order to achieve fulfillment, man strives, accumulates, imitates, loves, hates, decides, gains, loses, squanders, and dissipates. This describes life on earth in the usual sense. The entire training of man in the world is aimed at achieving such a life through aggression, submission, or violence. The kingdom of God on earth is, therefore, a myth. There is neither the possibility of the so-called kingdom of God on earth nor that of the demon. It is man always and man throughout. With intelligence and thought power, man can think, imagine, act, and express in words to a certain extent. But usually, thinking has a drawback. Always thinking in terms of self, family, religion, and nation, a person occupies a small corner in the vast field of life. It is a mystery why man is enamored of a tiny portion of life instead of the whole of it. Most likely, this is a product of the fear of vastness and the resultant uncertainty regarding one's personal background. This background is the family, the society, and the culture in which one is born, accidentally. The background presents itself in attractive colors. Structured and decorated with bewitching baits, it inveigles man into conforming to its exclusive ideologies, age-old customs, and separative doctrines. In return, it promises continuity, security, and protection within its narrow precincts. It also advocates the importance of biological survival within the society and encourages groupism to advance separative interests in the world at large. Every society has its own image of respectability, which plays an important part in individual life. When man is caught up in the image of the society, the tendency is to isolate from those who do not belong to this society. People furthermore evolve methods and formula to strengthen and fortify the society to which they owe allegiance. In partnership with others, each spreads a message to the contemporary world. This innate tendency of isolation has resulted in the division of the human world, giving rise to bigotry, competition, and hate the other campaigns. The ill of the world has grown from division and fragmentation of its solidarity. Groupism, linguistic rivalry, color hatred, religious fanaticism, nationality neurosis, and political animosity are prevalent at every level in varying degrees. In view of these conditions of fragmentation, is it possible to evolve out of this precarious situation which appears to have trapped us for good? Is there any ism among the umpteen numbers of isms scorching the world which can guarantee indivisibility? In the first place, let us consider the case of an individual who is born in a particular society which has its own rules, regulations, moral codes, and divergent activities. As stated, man is born innocent. The mind is empty of conditioning. Birth is an innocent act of associated factors, both cohesive and coercive at the same time, flowering within the interplay of collective and collaborative conscious propensities. Growing within a pattern governed by heritage, tradition, and the like, the pattern gradually takes hold of mental faculties and behavioral tendencies. Evolution is, therefore, confined to the narrow limit of the pattern, which indirectly carves out a place for the individual in society according to one's drive and ability. This leads to irretrievable conformity on the part of the individual concerned, who is lulled temporarily into a false sense of security. This situation does not in any way help one's evolution as a human being in the broader sense of the term. On the contrary, it impedes the creative ability and makes one dependably dull, insensitive, and self-centered. As a result, the whole personality recedes into the darkness of ignorance imposed by the society with which one identifies, grudgingly or ungrudgingly. Although man is born innocent, he is not ignorant. Ignorance is forced upon each person during the gradual process of growth. Each succumbs, consciously or unconsciously. Though not born in ignorance, man allows himself to be led away into its snares because of the fear of being left alone. Thus, being led by the nose, he grows in ignorance and dies in ignorance. During the span of this prolonged ignorance, constituting the phases of growth and preservation, each person enters into a series of activities aimed at achieving the conceptual goal of stability. Through the acquisition of materials for comfort and sustentation, the expansion of contacts, the imitation of distinguished personalities, and the development of competitive endeavors, one secures a place, although shaky, among the galaxy of the so-called men of integrity, potentiality, and purpose. However spectacular and widespread, human activities are to a greater extent in the same range and in the same field of ignorance, even though they are named differently as social activities, political activities, religious activities, spiritual activities, and so on. What is the net result of all these activities piled up over centuries of existence? It is still misery, pain, and frustration with a tinge of hope here and there. The fact is, the whole world is fragmented because humanity itself is fragmented. The worldly personality is a built-up personality of one's own, apart from the whole. It is always in the midstream of conflict and tension. Energy is wasted in keeping it in the midstream, though it is tossed over again and again. If its position is changed, a person feels lost and neglected. Ideas of progress and survival are totally misconceived. Divisions are the centers of inspiration. The concept of progress of a fragment outside of the whole is no progress, and, likewise, the idea of survival of a fragment apart from the whole is no survival. Yet man takes pride in maintaining the divisions by indefatigably clinging to them. This is the curse of humanity. This is the tragedy of the world. And yet man behaves as if not aware of this. To know this, it is imperative to go with feeling and concern into the factors leading to the emergence of the so-called worldly personality of man, and also to understand why man is being led away from the source. Chapter 2. Division, Education, and Disorder. The Process of Becoming. Summary. Shaped by society, divisions of thought create divisions of identification in the worldly personality. In spite of the fleeting awareness of actuality that many people receive, the grip of the false sense of security maintained by the collective tends to divide people and create irreconcilable rifts. Education has failed to foster wholeness, harmony, or accord. By encouraging ideas of becoming imaginary flights of the mind, education has rather decreased the capacity for individual confrontation of factual conditions, both within and without. The illusion of human progress is a sure sign and symptom of the discrepancy between mental conception and actuality. The present state of disorder in the world represents an enormous movement in ignorance. Let us now investigate the worldly personality to find out the cause of its critical plight in the field of existence, precipitated by anomalous divisions and liable factors of fragmentation. Although endowed with intelligence and a tremendous capacity to think and thrive, human activities are in no way conducive to the common good of the human race. Historically, the human race has never been united. Never has there been solidarity or oneness of purpose. The racial, religious, and psychological differences have not been bridged, even to this day. The gap is becoming wider and wider under the stress of the swiftly changing pace of life and the crushing burden of tradition. It is a well-known fact that thinking has a great bearing on the life of man. Ultimately, all become what they think. Although existence is in the present, man always thinks of self in terms of the past or the future. Thinking is shaped and directed by tradition, culture, society, religion, and nationality. Man is a superb actor, playing many different roles in different phases of life, acting parts in different ways in different places as required by circumstances. Each person has a vocational field, a social field, a personal field, a national field, and a religious field. Limited energy is channeled through these fields of activity for different results. If the preconceived results are not in the offing, the man becomes dejected and suffers from depression with an impaired mental outlook. Fragmented, feeble energy gets lost in the desert of life, and as a result, the person turns ominous or devilish. Man the positive becomes man the negative. This is the result of fragmentation. Knowing fully well that fragmentation is the root cause of misery in the world, man has still not tried to restructure life to bring about unity. Instead, man is on the lookout for various means of escape. As such, each fragment is trying to gain supremacy over the other, creating competition, distortion, and tension. Man is therefore nothing but a bundle of fragments held together with a tailor-made exterior. With all this vanity, violence, and vociferation, man has landed itself into an extraordinary situation. Superficial inclinations at times inspire man to display even meekness for ulterior motives. Divisions may be relative in the physical sense, but psychologically, they are barriers isolating man from himself. They split the psyche into diverse currents and cross-currents. Since the tendency to divide has taken deep root in the subtle layers of consciousness, man is unable to see beyond a particular point in which he is centered. This is solely due to the lack of awareness of the real self. The real self, or the unconditioned innermost personality, is not the constellated conscious psyche. It's the anima, the soul, or the Atman, resplendent in its pristine purity. The identification with the conscious psyche, or the worldly personality, and the lack of awareness of the real self is termed avidya, or ignorance in the Vedantic vocabulary. Society, in its turn, as a protector of man's rights to avidya, or ignorance, helps to strengthen this ignorance and allows it to grow forever. Man, in his feebleness, feels proud of this artificial position in life offered by society and continues to revel in the same pattern. The pattern is so opaque that no light can penetrate it. Every dusk passes into night. Every dawn breaks into day. Likewise, in every life, the cloud clears, the light comes, and insight dawns. But the dawn of the insight fails to see the light of day. At times, one may feel the fleeting presence of a streak of lightning opening the portals of clarity. The split-second glimpse of what is may bring one face to face with actual life. But a confused mind will not give the required courage to transcend the existing divisions towards a fuller life. Consequently, one reaches a point of psychological stagnation in which negative tendencies are germinated. The negative tendencies are generally retroactive and psychotropic in nature. The mind becomes queasy under the impact of the constant activity of these negative tendencies, contributing largely to the collective fate of each group or society of which one is a part. Society, laboring under the darkness of its own shadow, blunders through the maze of negative tendencies and projected ideation. Society is said to have been built upon the basis of a morality, conceived and formulated by men having identical interests. In order to further the cause of a particular group or society, the world is comprised of innumerable groups and societies, ushering in an era of conflicting ideologies and competitive endeavors. Whenever a plausible explanation for problems is not available within the tenets of a particular society, the society, as a rule, like any religion, lapses into abstraction. Each group or society is formed by the human intellect with motivations and ideas of self-progress. The validity of extension and survival, therefore, depends upon the feasible extent of inducement of individuals to abstraction or a false sense of security. Society is generally equipped with a propaganda machinery, which itself is noisy and confused. Great importance is attached to the teaching of its privileged intelligentsia, although the intelligentsia itself is the product of confusion and tension. Its very teachings are, by and large, thrust upon others unceremoniously in a bid to gain popularity and acclaim. The result is the emergence of an artificial image contrary to the facts of life. The facts of life are different in essentials from the facts and circumstances of images, which everyone is trying assiduously to project. The hiatus between actuality and superficiality has contributed to the stress and strain in every walk of life. The tension is so great that it has separated human beings from human beings to the extent of severe alienation. The result is violence, hatred, jealousy, and isolation. Man is said to be wise, learned, and intelligent. He has not, however, been able to tackle his own problems arising out of a misunderstanding of his relationship with other members of the species. In the fields of technology, science, psychology, anthropology, religion, and philosophy, Man's achievements are spectacular, but curiously enough, they do not touch the core of humanity. Even so-called modern education, which is aimed at all-sided progress, seems to be deficient and unreal in the sense that it tends to divide and create greater rifts among persons, extensively so where groups and nations are concerned. The aim of education is to make the individual whole, to reduce the existing drudgery, and to promote goodwill and wholehearted participation in the affairs governing human conduct. Although this real aim is to bring about harmony and concord, education has merely ended up in wishful thinking and errant adventures. Evidently, a divided and separated individual cannot work out harmony either in a society or in a nation. Obviously, within existing circumstances, the idea of a new society with a universal outlook is an impossibility. In his enthusiasm to create a new society and to conquer nature for his own benefit, man has not only created chaotic conditions, but has also alienated nature as well as the naturalness of the human disposition. Consequently, man has gone far away from himself in search of utopian ideals in the unknown pastures of imagination. The treasure, which he is trying to locate outside himself, is an unknown entity, a mere conception. It has no base, yet there is a tremendous drive in a predetermined direction. This is a blind venture in the name of progress. With all these efforts spread out over millennia, man is still at the takeoff stage thinking he has reached his objectives. Purposeful outward progress has contributed a tremendous value to inner poverty. Society, education, religion, morality, goals have not in any way helped the human race move anywhere outside the narrow world shrouded in darkness. An erroneous thought projected by the egocentric psyche is that the human race has progressed or is progressing. This has created a false halo which is, in reality, a sure sign of decay and the resultant horror. Each day begins with violence, intrigues, political skirmishes, ideological bickering, and antagonistic propaganda. Each person is separate. Each family is separate. Each society is separate. Each religion is separate. Each nation is separate. The principle of survival in isolation at the cost of others has become the order of the day. Each isolating factor is a motivation for aggression, and each motivation is a valid reason for vindictive vandalism and unprecedented violence. These are progressive activities of the human race in general. The individual psyche and the collective psyche, which are engaged in these activities, are, therefore, moored in disorder. Disorder is an enormous movement in ignorance. According to the general belief, action is inspired and directed by intelligence. Man is eclectic by nature. Since actions are responsible for the chaotic conditions prevalent in the world, the credibility of intelligence with its entire razzle-dazzle is questionable. What we call intelligence is, perhaps, a projection of ignorance, clustered with motivations and cunning manipulations, enabling man to live centuries after centuries in kaleidoscopic subservience. The worldly personality is caught up in a series of sequences and stereotype divisions. The process of becoming generally breeds divisions. Human identification with these divisions has led to the disintegration of man. Chapter 3. The conditioning of patterns and the generation of disorder. Summary. Perpetuated by religions and institutions in general, the process of becoming an externalized, projected image of oneself has moved human beings away from understanding the actuality of what is. The direction of movement has been towards the functional disorder of individual and collective conditioning, maintained by accumulated knowledge and the fractured identifications of the body and the psyche. This conditioning has imprisoned the human being within the narrow confines of contaminated and dead patterns of living. Reflexive repetitions of human conditioning continue the cruel, craving, and domineering tendencies of the world, which are linked to its present state of disorder, conflict, and disaster. Human beings are involved in the process of becoming, with the result that their natural personalities are glossed over by an artificial dazzle, almost blinding them to the core of their being. The human psyche is actually trapped within the phantasmagoria of the process of becoming. Having no space for expansion, it is passing through a bottleneck termed existence. The process of becoming is generally called evolution. Although it is subject to several interpretations, evolution is chthonic in nature. All human institutions, including religion, are the direct results of the process within the ambit of the pleasure-pain principle. Their original aim is to extricate man from this entrenched, paradoxical situation, and to provide a formula or a method to bring about lasting harmony among mankind. Strangely enough, institutions have failed to deliver the goods. The very idea that religions and institutions could bring about a psychological oneness among individuals, groups, and nationalities has backfired. In the course of human history, religions and institutions have become separative instruments in the hands of unscrupulous elements, serving as a basis for the internecine quarrels and wars. Human history is the history of isolation, aggression, strife, violence, and wars. The entire activity of the world is a trial of strength in selfishness and calculated misdemeanors against others. The present situation is so explosive and debasing that we can hardly call ourselves human beings. No amount of thinking, preaching, or propaganda can solve these problems unless a fundamental change takes place in the basic individual personality, which is held at bay in the process of becoming. The verbalized ideals of religion are nothing but pious frauds perpetrated upon the individual as well as the collective psyche to make it more complex, plangent, and conditioned. The constellated area of conditioning, the stronghold of man, is nothing but the dubious I personality, which seemingly has a dual nature, unity and diversity. Although the word unity is a misnomer in the context of constant fragmentation, it has a temporary hold on the human mind when a common cause is put forth for achievement in the face of impending danger. In other areas, the idea of unity has strings to pull. At times, the pulls are so strong that the subject involved is almost strangulated. This is a common occurrence in everyday life. All the actions and movements of this dual personality of man are deliberate, perfidious, and antagonistic to what is. There is a difference between what is as it is, and the encrusted image of what is, which man has identified consciously. As a result, with a smorgasbord approach, the human psyche is accustomed to work on ulterior projections. The same is the case with the collective psyche conditioned by religious circumlocution. The chief ingredients used by religious fanatics as life-saving formulas are, after all, life-killing baits. Unless one understands the implications of one's position and the extent of involvement in the functional disorder of such movements, one has no solution for one's problems. The human race has a rich heritage and a long history, but it has come down the gradient and slipped into the abyss of wantonness and cruelty. Past glory cannot come to its rescue. With all its defects and resources, the human race cannot escape from its responsibility, the onerous task of redeeming its lost ground of honor. In the first place, it is necessary to shed all established patterns and come out of the sepulchral past and non-existent future. As long as the human race works within the narrow circumference of self-centeredness, blindly conforming to established patterns, there is no end to the miserable plight confronting man every moment. However hard he thinks and tries to put himself on a parallel line of unilateral positivity, he works within the same circle, through the same center. Human movement, however wide and enlarged in the relative world, is confined to the circle only. Is there a way to come out of this vicious circle? Is there a method to prevent its very formation? The answer to these questions cannot be encouraging at the outset, but a deeper study into the process involving the formation of the circle might lead one to the source. The source is obviously hidden in thought. The process of thinking, evidently, has an enormous bearing on this complicated subject. Since man is a thinking animal, he cannot live without thinking. Thinking is the outcome of acquired and accumulated knowledge. The past is, in turn, the product of individual or collective conditioning, although thought in general is considered to be the epiphenomenon of the mind. Since thought has to pass through the sizzling process of conditioning at every stage, its purity and clarity are lost to the world. Therefore, the world appears to be a conglomeration of conditioned thought, ethnocentric in nature. Thought is responsible for the emergence of the individual psyche and the formation of the collective psyche. These are the individual or collective conscious personalities. The human psyche is nothing but prearranged thought in its phenomenal aspect, whereas pure and unconditioned thought is true intelligence. Unfortunately, conditioned thought has become the established propellant of life. Therefore, life is not governed by intelligence, but is enmeshed in conditioned thought, which is ignorant of reality. Man is not only the product of his own thought, but more or less he is the byproduct of others' thought as well. Thoughts are always colored and contaminated by the medium through which they pass. To a larger extent, they imbibe the qualities and characteristics of the medium. The medium is nothing but the crucible or the complex matrix of the alchemists. This matrix is also the mind in the anthropos, with the brain and its nascent concomitants as its content. The brain is the storehouse of memories, scars, and experiences. It is also the source of thought and the progenitor of the human psyche. Therefore, man is the product of the mind-brain-thought complex. The body, brain, heart, and sense organs are physical assets, whereas the emotions, sentiments, intuitions, and thought forms are psychological treasures. The former, namely the physical assets with their changeability and adjustability, are perceivable and easily understandable, but the psychological implications concerning emotions, sentiments, and intuitive manifestations are only to be felt and experienced. Both the physical as well as the psychological aspects are as deficient in their divisions as they are deprived of their subtle relatedness to each other. There is a definite relationship between the physical wants and the psychological requirements of each and every person. The physical needs, barring the artificials, are genuine to a certain extent, but the psychological cravings are hard to understand, even though they are at times attributed to altruistic tendencies. Man has a biological urge and a psychological impulse based on the unconscious surge of residual motifs. At times, the surface value of psychological needs is expressed in physical effort. Although both are interdependent, the overall effect is felt in the dominance of the psyche, the overbearing inner personality of man, over the physical pattern. In spite of the physical and psychological factors coexisting in a complementary fashion, there is no harmony between them, and each factor is a projected function and an independent entity. An individual who identifies with different entities is divided internally. It is quite evident that these divisions, these fragmented identifications, in trying to vie with each other, are in constant conflict. Conflict causes tension. Since thought has a psychological character, it constantly supports the psychological tendencies, such as craving, domineering, desiring, and double-dealing. The physical aspects obey the command of the psyche, which is put up and nursed by thought. The psyche, in a sense, is the illusion created by thought. Man identifies with the psyche, therefore man is thought. According to general belief, the origin of thought is the mind. It is further argued that the mind is matter, though it is not visible to the physical eyes. Its chosen instrument is the brain, which it wields dexterously at all times. With its intricate layouts, the brain is the real storehouse. All the experiences, memories, and past impressions are lodged safely in the folds of the brain. The brain cells are said to be the repositories and the relay centers of everything that has been recorded and that is being recorded. Since thought is mind-born, it is also brain-born, as the mind without the brain is not the human mind. Thought emanates from the brain and, therefore, is a product from the storehouse of the brain released constantly with reoccurring viability. The brain holds everything that is past and old. Therefore, thought is also past and old. Thought has no independent existence apart from past records, which are impressed on the brain cells. The recorded past is what we call knowledge. All the experiences, memories, and impressions build up knowledge, and knowledge is the known. Thought in disguise as knowledge acts as the well-bred propaganda agent. Knowledge is therefore also old. Brain cells equate to a storehouse of the conditioned past. Thought and knowledge are, therefore, conditioned and of the past. Hence, they have no newness or novelty in any of their functions. Whatever has been put up by thought or projected by it within the ambit of conditioned knowledge is also old and belongs to the past. Elsewhere, this treatise points out that the psyche, or the inner personality, has been put up by thought in its one-sided effort for personal survival. Therefore, the psyche is also old and conditioned. All the actions arising in man and surging forward, continuously or intermittently, have their origin in the complex interplay of the combined sources of thought, knowledge, and psyche. Therefore, all actions are colored and contaminated by the past. Since the world is managed and maintained by the actions of man, it cannot contain anything new. The contents of the psyche, the human mind, and the world are identical in every detail. There is no difference between the ordinary mind and the psyche on the one side and the world on the other, although they appear to be distinct. They have no existence apart from their contents. Humanity is intimately concerned with the contents of the world, the psyche, and the mind.
Chapter 4. The Limitations of Identification with an Artificial Upbringing. Summary. In spite of the instrumental necessity of thought in the conduct of life, humanity is allowed contaminated, conditioned, and divisive thought to overrun its innate intelligence. This has occurred through the role-playing of human actors who over-identify with the fragments of the whole assigned to them by society, custom, and religion. Although real growth can only evolve in freedom, people remain in constriction and in identification with a fragment of life, because of the blinding dazzle of the shackles of conditioning to which they are bound. By conforming with fear to established patterns and binding superstition, the individual cannot hope to discover the total movement of life in the common substratum of relationship. A close observation into the workings of the mind reveals that it is not an empty nothing, but a loaded something. It has content. The brain, with its recorded experiences and memories, is its important content. Thought emanates from the content of the brain. As the expressive medium of the brain, thought is also the content of the mind. If there is no thought, there is no mind, because mind is expressed through thought. So thought is absolutely necessary to call the mind, and to recognize it as such. It is common knowledge in some quarters that mind is matter. Therefore, its content is also matter. Since thought is its main content, we need not hesitate to conclude that thought is matter. Thought is responsible for shaping the course of human life. If there is no thought, there is no life. Thought is, therefore, the main effector and creator of every twist and turn in life. This is not, however, a postulation of the idea that thought is not necessary, or that it has no place in the scheme of life in view of its material background. Nor is this a division of life as spiritual and material. Nor is it even an attempt to give a new meaning to it. Life is life, an indivisible movement running right through the universal blueprint. Thought has its own place in every walk of life. There are levels where thought is absolutely necessary. There are conditions where it is a nuisance and a distorting factor. In the day-to-day life, thought obviously has an important function. Without thought, one cannot even know what is what. On the other hand, thought has its disadvantages, which almost overrun its advantages. From the happenings in the world, Thought can be said to divide and to rule. Man, the intelligent, is generally overpowered by thought, because thought produces a powerful image of the future, and the future is what man is after. In this context, relationship in the world is a motivated and monopolized expression of sunshine and warmth in a given dimension. It is provided with side attraction and concealed interest, supported by the society in the form of etiquette, customs, and decorum. The meaning of all these expressions may be quite different from what they actually stand for. These expressions have, therefore, become important features of what is considered rational behavior. All of the above-mentioned superficial aspects of life have given rise to hypocritical tendencies. Even religion is held sacred only on the periphery of superficiality. This is quite natural, since it raises the question, what does religion mean to a fragmented personality? Religion is just one fragment among many, folding and unfolding according to the rise and fall of thought. Religion has not helped man to bring about harmony or understanding among the fragments. On the contrary, it has promoted further divisions and has created watertight compartments within which its followers may indulge in fanaticism. Religion has not answered man's eternal nor external needs. Although religious doctrines are universal in appeal, they remain constrictive and desultory within the functional limits of vested interests. These vested interests are responsible for brainwashing man and making him a puppet in the hands of established religionists, who are ingenious and covert in their overall approach. It is quite obvious that human beings are born into a sect or a religion and are influenced at the very outset. It is, therefore, very hard to go beyond the circumscribed limits of the religion into which they are born, even though occasionally they notice and understand the inadequacy and futility of the application to life of preaching in general. Life is a total movement, not a partial manifestation of something other than what it is. But man is ever caught up in the widening net of the superficiality of religion and held in bondage even beyond the conscious level. It stands to reason that one cannot grow to fulfillment in bondage. Real growth is always in freedom. Man in the present situation can only think of freedom, not experience it. Freedom, furthermore, is not a thing to be experienced. Religion not only binds man, it also blinds him with the dazzle reflected from its glass house. Man, thus blinded, even becomes unaware of the pole to which he is bound. A blind man can only grope in darkness without seeing the light, which is everywhere. Unless freed from all shackles, man cannot hope to see or experience the perennial light of wisdom. But people are even afraid of looking at their shackles, because of their identity with the glittering material from which it is made. In the fear of losing what they have, even the prison gives the impression of vast space, but its walls are next to the skin. Freedom is, therefore, within the walls of a prison. Even courageous people have an element of fear lurking in the deeper layers of consciousness. This is the fear that if they do not follow their religion, at least outwardly, they become subject to the punishments detailed in religious doctrines. The original fear psychosis, substantiated and strengthened by the prevailing charlatanry, has prevented man from gaining insight into the intricate workings of the mind. Man has also drawn a curtain of superstition over the mind, which in itself is dynamic and intuitive. Behind the wavering shadows of the curtain, the intuition drawn from the mind has pushed man deeper into the vortex of superstition. The entire human race is superstitious in one way or another. Some are superstitious due to ignorance, and some, even though intelligent, are superstitious due to fear. Our intelligentsia, in a way, is also drawn into superstition because of the fear of the unknown, rooted deeply in the conscious as well as the unconscious layers. The fear of the unknown has come either through tradition or through different channels of experience, which may not be relevant to life in the now. There is no substantial difference between a man who is superstitious because of ignorance and an intelligent man who is superstitious due to fear. Both are victims of superstition and, therefore, both fall into the same category of imprisonment. Superstition is the easiest way of escape. Man is not bothered to go into the consequences of this errant nuisance. Every adventure in life has a superstitious beginning. The inner dynamism is a secondary factor in most ventures. Efforts are, therefore, partial and half-hearted. The society incorporating half man and quarter effort cannot expect to make internal or external developments of lasting nature on any known plane. All outward efforts, however emphatic they appear to be, end up as fads without substance. Even the meaning given to the relationship in such a society is guided by superstition and has no bearing whatsoever on its real, endearing, or enduring qualities. The Eastern society characteristically falls into this category. The Western society has its own characteristics, with less superstition and greater sophistication. In this respect, it has a great advantage over the Eastern society. The minimum of superstitious elements, with their sophisticated bearings and prestigious positions, are channeled into scientific monstrosities and political exploitation. This has given rise to power politics. The imbalance thus created between the Eastern and Western societies has wrought havoc in the world. All have been experiencing its results in everyday life in the form of confrontation, misunderstandings, and violence. Every society is attached to its own ideals. Likewise, every individual is attached to the ideals of his society. Although not wholeheartedly, every society and every individual conform to the established patterns, while making these patterns more astounding and complicated. Unless man steps out of this perilous conditioning and prevents all paradoxical situations from taking hold, he cannot hope for a better world in which real relationship, with its common substratum, may become one of the guiding factors of destiny. Since the question of relationship is a serious matter concerning all human activities, it requires a thorough investigation in light of the day-to-day deteriorating conditions in the world. If man knows what real relationship is, without entangling in the appearances of its outward presentation, he may perhaps know himself as he is. Chapter 5. Freedom and Real Relationship. Summary. Relationship has become a mechanical and insincere contract, not between human beings, but rather between two conditioned, projected personalities to earn goodwill for selfish ends. Within the profound silence of the immeasurable, the real meaning of relationship is the intelligent harmonization of all human elements for the flowering of humane humanity. If extraneous tendencies are dropped and one's loyalty is not divided within and without, one is free to know oneself as one is. Movement away from superficiality releases one's focus towards the precise existential requirements of life. Liberation from projected societal and personality images allows the individual to perceive everything for its exact value, including one's own self, allowing the wholeness of life to support a humane approach to relationship. Scriptures enjoin us to see that real self-knowledge is the authentic foundation of life, leading to a workable formula for the elimination of non-essentials and the self-discovery of the genuine life current of eternal love. Relationship is tricky to explain in the context of present-day circumstances. Our relationship with the world, with ourselves, and with our kith and kin is superficial in varying aspects. Different terminologies present relationship in different ways. There are distant relationships, close relationships, family relationships, social relationships, blood relationships, religious relationships, and political relationships. Evidently, there are different relationships with different persons in different contexts. The relationship with oneself is divided into several categories according to archetypal symbols and forms, laid down picturesquely within the confines of the peripheral unconscious, each category seemingly trying to dominate the other on its way to conscious conditions. Generally, relationship is contrived by thought with or without feeling tones. Not therefore an independent agency, it is a policy pattern formulated by the complex maneuverability of thought. Relationship is obviously concerned with a preconceived image or verbalized pattern of psychophysical or social psychological origin. Relationship means mutual respect and immense care, but according to general observation, it stands for aggression, subjugation, possessiveness, and tyranny, coupled with extraordinary excesses. Relationship, as a matter of fact, has become a convenient mode of communication for the display of superficial responsibility loaded with mischief, doubt, and deceitfulness. Relationship between father and son, husband and wife, brother and sister, has become so mechanical and meaningless that it has ceased to be the elixir of harmony. The real nature of relationship is shrouded in a mysterious business of suspicion and selfishness. Its roots are cut off. It is floating temporarily in the turbid waters of life. There is no direction or decency. The deployment of relationship on the border of sensitivity by religious rigors and social petulance is immensely harmful to its theme of absolute coordination. The sinister designs of society have reduced relationship to a puerile mannerism devoid of sincerity and cordiality. What is called relationship is, therefore, no relationship at all. Relationship is deeper than what it appears. It is deeper than the skin, thicker than the blood, and subtler than the breath. What is called relationship in the world is a contract between two preconceived images with several attributes. For the sake of convenience, or is it a contract between two qualified personalities trying to earn goodwill to promote selfish ends? As it is totally exterior to factual living and is separated by layers of conditioned projections. This form of relationship does not touch the core of reality nor the real self, hidden under various images created by thought. These personality images carry with them feelings concerning their own safety. They try to remain isolated from the mainstream of life. This paradoxical situation has isolated man from man, creating a state in which fear and suspicion of each other reign supreme. The gulf of differentiation, therefore, goes on widening. Relationship is not to weep when a man is dead, nor to print his name in the chapters of history, but to care with immense love untouched by words and emotions while he is living. Relationship is a non-dual state of existence, where psychological divisions cease. The real meaning of relationship is harmony, cooperation, and intelligent adjustment of all human elements involved in conflict and tension, in order to promote a meaningful and progressive development of each personality. This needs to evolve under varied circumstances without the enforcement of authority, control, cruelty, and conformity. The real function of relationship leads to the flowering of humane humanity in each and every human being within the profound silence of the immeasurable. Is it possible to achieve this? This question has ever bewildered the human ego. Unless one acquires a thorough knowledge of the functional threads of relationship interwoven within the fabric of each and every life, without frayed ends and knotted middles popping out, one cannot even think of an answer for so rich a question. To arrive at the answer, one needs to end all divisions within oneself. Body, mind, and heart should work harmoniously at all levels. One needs to see beyond jealousy, hatred, competition, violence, and selfish motivations. Individual progress, if there is any, will not come to an end if all these extraneous tendencies cease to function. On the contrary, if man himself is not divided in his loyalty to the different changing aspects of life, thinking that progress is dependent upon them, he not only puts himself into full awareness of the whole with its indivisible oneness, but he also promotes harmony and progressive trends in society, helping to bring about wider prosperity and a broader outlook among the peoples of the world. Humanity, to all intents and purposes, is not a localized entity, but a universal phenomenon. In every individualized approach, it should be recognized as such. If the differentiating and isolating factors, which work with tremendous force within an individual, come to an end, man will automatically be freed from the bondage of selfishness and dissension. Such freedom has a greater meaning in the context of all life. An individual freed is an individual gained on the side of goodness. Goodness is man in essentiality. This is the other, the reality of isness. What human beings think they are is the illusion of reality. The other is, therefore, not a myth nor a figment of imagination of a romantic, otherworldly poet, but a living reality in which all currents of life meet and merge. Freedom from what is not to escape from it, but to meet it fully and to transcend it eventually. Freedom is not outside oneself. Freeing oneself from one's own projected self is freedom. Freedom is, therefore, with man and within man. Whatever is projected outside as a goal to achieve freedom is a prison. It is not at all necessary for man to go out in the woods or to secluded places to achieve freedom. Freedom is, or it is not. If it is, man has missed it because of his atrocious nature and fastidious temperaments, which have thrown him outside of himself. Because of these tendencies, man thinks that everything, including the entity called God, is outside of himself, either in heaven or beyond. This error of judgment is perhaps embedded in the unconscious itself. Howsoever advanced one may be in the knowledge of mundane existence and scientific achievements, if one fails to understand the meaning underlying existence and relationship in its total aspect, within a workable formula, all efforts to establish a harmonious society and a social order of equanimity will be futile. The understanding of life depends upon the perception of life and the extent of the accuracy of this perception. One moment of total perception is sufficient to bring about the desired change which thousands of years of manipulations and calculations could not achieve. Although man is a phenomenon in himself, with contrasting achievements and despicable failures, the ability to understand himself as he is has eluded him, in spite of his outward show of intelligence, knowledge, and possession. Man is proud of his scientific achievements. Scientists have not only succeeded in splitting atoms, but have shown even greater skill in creating weapons of destruction by channeling atomic energy. Can they, however, explain the workings of their own minds, which are more destructive than the weapons they have created? The answer is in the negative. Partial knowledge is dangerous and destructive in nature. Evidently, man has contrived to destroy his own species by the spectacular achievements of his ego. Although the constructive aspect of science cannot be denied, it is far outweighed by its destructive capability. The demons are let loose in each and every mind. The equation has gone wrong. The world wants to succeed in its destruction and thrive with its horrors. That is what man learns in this ugly world of ours. This is what is called knowledge geared for progress. Unless man steps out of this debasing condition, there is no hope to achieve the kingdom of God on earth. What is in store for humanity after all? Is it doomed forever? It is heartening to think that every cloud has a silver lining with charm and benevolence. The opportunity is there for man to grasp. He need not run hither and thither in search of a solution for his problems. The solution resides in the problem itself. The self is the problem, and the solution is also the self. Therefore, all the progressive scriptures of the world have proclaimed in one voice, "Know thyself." If the self is known, everything is known. If the self is known, nothing remains unknown. If the self is really known, it is known forever. It can then function apart from its accumulated knowledge, which is the past, and which separates it from the whole, the real relationship. Oftentimes, man believes that knowledge is necessary to liberate oneself from the binding illusions of the world. The real knowledge of oneself is that knowledge through which one becomes essentially what one is and not what one was nor what one should be, as both are questionable projections of the unreal. This implies clarity of perception to the limit of pinpoint accuracy to gauge the real and exact value of everything that is there, including one's own self, without addition or subtraction. Addition and subtraction are both images projected by thought to increase or to decrease the real value of what is. Since man is caught up in images, he is far away from actuality and, therefore, far from the truth. As a result, his relationships with himself and with others have a superficial quality that is not natural. Superficiality wanes and waxes in accordance with his own involvement, as prompted by circumstances. The moment man comes out of his cocoon, relationship becomes impersonal and motiveless, as the focus of freedom falls abundantly upon the existential exactitude of life. This, what is devoid of duality. Here, the barrier of knowledge is lifted and the background illumined. All human beings are basically the same as far as the body and its functions are concerned. They are also the same in suffering, joys, ups and downs of life, pain and pleasure, birth, growth, and death. These cannot be transcended as long as the body exists. We do not know for certain whether these can be transcended even after death. Since all the above factors are common to each and every individual in varying degrees, where does the difference lie? The difference probably lies in the images and the perceptions of their intricate makeup. To understand this minutely is to understand all the fundamental issues involved in personality cult and class mania. To see everything as it is to eliminate the unwanted. The unwanted is the thick wall of separation. The moment it is eliminated, man may become one in relationship and taste its soothing and nectarine property. Evidently, relationship has no center, no personality, no background, no judgment, no conclusion, no past, and no future. It is an impersonal, homogeneous whole, which includes each and every aspect of life without division. It is. Therefore, it is devoid of the I and the you, the me and the thou. It is like the clear water of a vast river flowing into a shoreless ocean. It is the dazzling flame of the soul, which is free and eternal. It is love. Chapter 6, Perception and Relationship. Summary. Real perception is total attention without the mediation of recollection, inference, and cognition. These mediators intervene and interfere with attention by producing distorted perceptions that are based on past knowledge. Prior learning can often be incorrect as related to present circumstances. If the perception is a misperception, however, a distorted relationship will ensue and chaotic conditions will be generated. Troubles in relationship begin with the craving for the repetition of a particular sensory perception and its subsequent reaction. Purity of relationship occurs in simpler persons who are free from the cunning and undercutting influences of modern knowledge. As products of the old, religions propose an escape from the prevailing confusion, but these escapes do not succeed because they emerge from the very disorder they propose to transcend. The foregoing pages have dealt with the background of human conditioning and the essential meaning of relationship. All human activities reside in the field of ignorance, however knowledgeable and intelligent they appear to be. This chapter will continue to shed more light on this observation. To reiterate, relationship is love, and love is not what we think it to be. It is beyond the depth of perception and the grasp of the mind. Some say that God is love, and vice versa. Investigating the nature of perception leads to the usual understanding of perception as seeing. In the typical case, perception is a process of seeing involving time, space, quality, attribute, and prior knowledge. For example, when a person sees a tree, prior knowledge indicates that it is a tamarind tree, or a jackfruit tree, or a palm tree, through the instrumentality of memory, which responds to the contact established through perception. Perception involuntarily helps the recognition of the object of perception. The accuracy and the reliability of the information thus supplied through knowledge and perception depend upon the unchangeability of the object perceived. This object has supposedly not undergone any modification during the intervening period between the prior knowledge of its existence and its present perception. If there is another tree resembling the one perceived, which is not a tamarind tree, nor a jackfruit tree, nor a palm tree, then the information and the subsequent recognition are incorrect. Therefore, perception through past knowledge may be either correct or incorrect, depending upon the actuality of the object perceived. Perception involves seeing, contact, recollection, inference, and cognition. Recollection, inference, and cognition are always based on the past knowledge of the thing perceived, although the seeing of it is in the present. There is a marked difference between seeing what is and seeing through past knowledge. For another example, perhaps a particular person is a drunkard. As soon as we see him, we recognize him as a drunkard, even though at that particular moment he is not drunk. Here our perception has failed to supply the accurate knowledge of the present condition of the person, perceived in a somewhat changed circumstance. It has simply projected the preconceived image of the person retained by knowledge as memory. Evidently, perception functions in two parts, the first being seeing and contact, and the second involving recollection, inference, and cognition. Prior knowledge and present seeing, intermingled in the same process, distort the factual condition of the object to give a totally different meaning altogether, which is far from the truth. The process of perception has a misleading nature. The process of perception can be divided into three categories: physical perception, mental perception, and unconscious perception. As soon as a thing is perceived, there's a chain reaction involving all three categories in different degrees. The reaction, depending upon the object of perception, produces different feelings, such as concern or apathy, regard or disregard, like or dislike, respect or negligence, love or hatred. Over and above these reactions, if the thing perceived is immensely appealing to any one of the senses, there is a partial sensation. If it is intensely appealing to all the senses at the same time, there is a total sensation. Since perception brings contact, it also promotes relationship. Perception and contact are generally responsible for the first impression, which may not necessarily be the last impression. Impressions undergo changes. After leaving a mark on the human mind, they recede into the unconscious as inactive motifs. As unconscious symbols, they manage to come up again with greater force in response to suitable stimuli. These unconscious impressions are generally responsible for benevolent, malevolent, or revengeful acts. The to and fro journey of these impressions, from conscious to unconscious and vice versa, via the subconscious, leads to the activation of mingled experiences and distorted perceptions in the subconscious. During the waning phase of consciousness, these impressions are called dreams. Therefore, dreams are abnormal or subnormal in their presentations, although they are repetitions of day-to-day conscious activities or recurrent activities of bygone days. This may perhaps provide a clue to the continuity of life after the death of the body. Now, reverting to the subject of perception, the oft-repeated phrase, "love at first sight," generally ends in tragedy. Although first sight generates love, especially in the opposite sex, it is a reaction of biological factors operating blindly through the process of perception. If perception ends at the seeing contact level, there is no merry-go-round, nor is there involvement in any other unholy aspects of perception leading to elation or disappointment and the resultant ambiguity. It is only when one craves for the repetition of experience that the trouble starts. Love at first sight is meaningful if the first sight is the last sight, which can only happen in totality. Perception is total attention. It is therefore immediate and mediate. It is always in the present. Perception occurs not through a part of one's personality, but through one's total self, including body, mind, and heart. Although perception helps to establish relationship, it can be said that any relationship based on distorted perception is also distorted and leads to near chaotic conditions in life. It is absolutely necessary to be careful in interpreting one's reactions to perception, especially where a relationship is concerned. To all intents and purposes, relationship is the sum total of peaceful existence and not a chaotic behavior of the mind involving tension, jealousy, and hatred. Relationship is a matter of concern in the relative sense, although the word concern is a loaded expression for self-interest and narrow motivation. The transparent purity of relationship can be found in those the world calls lesser persons, who are far away from the cunning influence of modern knowledge. Strangely enough, modern knowledge, which brings disruption and disunity in human relationship, is considered to be the foremost factor for human progress and the summum bonum of existence. To go into the question of progress is to enter the wilderness. There are, however, certain concrete facts which lead us to believe that the word progress is wrongly applied to man's aggression, violence, and destructive capability. Although man enjoys superiority over other creatures because of his ruthless intelligence, he is in no way better than they are from the social point of view. The realm of progress is in the past. The idea of progress is the known, which is also the history of violence, aggression, and war. Displaying old pictures in new frames will not speak for the progress of an artist. Likewise, old ideas pushed forward in new garb cannot contribute to progress. When man has not eschewed violence, when he has not given up aggression and war, what progress has he made over years, and in what direction? The devil of destruction has taken the place of man in man. The entire human race is in confusion over the issue of progress. As a result, there is large-scale deterioration in the concepts of progress and relationship. The human race, with its thousands of divisions, ideologies, codes of conduct, beliefs, and dogmas, is engaged in a terrible internal strife, and the outcome is anybody's guess. This is the social order man has established in the world after thousands of years of experience. Caught between the devil and the deep, all activities, as long as they encircle the same center, are rather futile. In this turmoil and confusion, someone who is considered a paragon of virtues may come and say, "We have to bring order. We have to establish Dharma. We cannot live in this chaos forever." Being inspired by these inciting words, others help that person to exert, to collect followers, and to establish a new pattern of preaching within the old frame. Since this is also the result of that very disorder, it has no power of its own to overcome opposing factors. A man may attract a section of the people for a time and ultimately go the way of like-minded predecessors. His preaching is thrown out of the window. This is what has happened to all religions, although their skeletons gather dust in everyone's closet. Every religion is the product of the old in succession, sponsored as a means of escape from the prevailing confusion. Since they have nothing new in them, they have failed miserably. Some even die in the cradle. Religions are like lanterns in the hands of the blind. What is the way out? Is there a solution at all? And if there is, does the solution lie in accepting what is going on all around us as inevitable to human existence? Or is there any other approach more feasible and sound, which is not an outcome of associated factors, crystallizing from a conditioned background or from a preconceived attitude common to the present-day human society? Is it possible for us to negate all that we stand for, knowing that it has proved disastrous to real human progress, and that it has kept us within the prison walls of our society over centuries of ignorant endeavors to achieve happiness?
Chapter 7. Consciousness and Desire. Summary. In spite of the transporting beauty of nature, human beings have imprisoned themselves inside incrustations of beliefs, patterns, dogmas, and superstitions. Life is a movement in consciousness, yet temporal life produces the internal divisions of unconscious, the subconscious, and the conscious. Reactions of the expressive psyche to the archetypical structures released from the unconscious are largely responsible for the imbalances of the human personality. Self-study uncovers the contents of consciousness and the preeminence of desire, which extroverts and divides one's energy. There is no method to eliminate desire other than to understand it fully. If one does not waste energy in comparison and imitation, or in judgment and measurement, one can face the formidable truth of oneself and of life. Desire and creation. A poet wants to catch the beauty of nature in flowery words. A painter tries to capture it on his canvas with brush and colors. A layman wonders at its marvel. An engineer wants to express it in the models of his machines. A doctor tries to analyze the work of nature in the human body. A philosopher muses and withdraws. A lover expresses it in his behavioral patterns. A cuckoo coos melodiously in the nearby trees in spring and hides itself in the dense forest during the rains. Yet man in general does not share in the animated expressions of nature, nor does he welcome the joy and beauty which is radiated from every nook and corner of the world. Man prefers to live in the ugliness of his prison. Man feels safe within its walls and happy in its workmanship. Activities start from the prison and end in the prison. The vast horizon outside is screened from sight, and prison walls have no windows. If man had ever thought of providing a small skylight to his prison, it would have surely served as a window on eternity. His preference, however, is for darkness and ignorance. Preference comes from choice, and choice is the outcome of fear. The narrow entrance of this prison is blocked with piles of beliefs, dogmas, and superstitions. Even if God wants to respond to prayers offered within the prison wall, he cannot cross the threshold of the prison. It is barricaded and barred from entry. All the patterns, methods, and formula emerging out of this prison serve as a formidable encrustation within which the real self is entombed. This incrustation, with its numerous pigeonholes, compartments, and hideouts, has provided a habitat for all these images created by thought, enabling them to play hide-and-seek with human life. Man who identifies with these images has acquired an illusory personality. This personality is called the conscious or worldly personality. The collective result of these personalities is the world. Therefore, there is no difference between man and the world. Both are creations of thought, and thought is the content of consciousness. To make a bold statement, consciousness is nothing but man in all of his ramulose functionalism, huddled, cuddled, chilled, and chiseled. Consciousness is living energy. Life is a movement in consciousness. The movement of life in time has divided consciousness into conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. The unconscious is the substratum of everything that manifests as the conscious in consciousness. The subconscious is the middle expanse of consciousness, through which the unconscious contents pass on their way to the conscious and vice versa. The content of the unconscious is stirred by an internal stimulus, which works as a mysterious catalyst for the unconscious seed forms to sprout and surface to the conscious through the medium of the subconscious. Evidently, the unconscious is the unknown. The subconscious is the partially known, and the conscious is the known. Broadly speaking, these are the psychological divisions of consciousness. They are comparable to the empirical phenomena of night, dawn, and day, respectively. Even though there are three divisions, the dividing lines are only two. The subconscious is the middle range of the division. It touches both the conscious and unconscious peripherally. The tree of life rising from the unconscious passes through the subconscious and flowers in the conscious. Its root is in the unconscious, the middle is in the subconscious, and the top is in the conscious. Even though the tree is one, it appears disjointed at two places, namely when it touches the fringe of the subconscious and the periphery of the conscious during its growth from unconscious to conscious. Due to the distortions caused by the differentiated densities of the medium through which it passes, life appears disjointed and denominated. Since man is conditioned by the notion of fragmentation and superficially divided in conscious projections, the divisions appear to have taken deep root in the consciousness. The unconscious is known to contain the residual traces of all the experiences that pass through the territory of the subconscious. These traces undergo changes and modifications during their passage to the conscious surface as dreams, hallucinatory motifs, geometrical designs, which are also called mandalas, shadow phantoms, and archaic symbols. All of these have a free play and expressive psyche. They serve as vehicles of thought of varying degrees of speed and diversification. The reaction of the expressive psyche to the released archetypal structures of the unconscious is largely responsible for the imbalance created in man's personalities with its ambiguities, confused approaches, and sadistic reproaches. The whole background of man is superimposed on the brain cells through which thought emanates. The expressive psyche is, therefore, the psyche, which is expressed through thought. Since the psyche is the inner personality expressed through thought, man is either equated with thought or he is thought itself. The psyche is, therefore, also thought. As long as thought is in operation, the inherent divisions, ever multiplying in their outward movements, cannot come to an end. Every division has its chain reaction, and every reaction helps the continuation of thought in an ever-widening circle. The recycling of the impulsive responses of the psyche to thought stimuli is carried out by the egocentric reversal of the psychosomatic energy. This energy is channeled and directed towards the inbuilt emotional reservoirs of consciousness, on which the ship of life is set afloat. The word conscious is subject to several interpretations. When we say we are conscious of something, it shows our concern. In the usual course, we are conscious of our demands, our petty quarrels, our woes and wants, our friends and enemies, and so on. Yet we are never conscious of our own real self, which is the only reality in diversity. The real self is covered by conscious images created by thought. As such, we cannot hope to be consciously aware of the real self. There is no doubt about the fact that the conscious is the known. It is knowledge, and knowledge is always of the past. Thought is knowledge, and it is the content of consciousness. Knowledge is generally based upon the modes of contact established through thought. Since thought sees everything through the eye of the past, the knowledge gained through thought cannot be direct knowledge, but must be inferential in nature. Inferential knowledge is subject to fallacy because it is drawn from the immediate factors of thought-oriented images of an object. Generally, we assume we know everything about an object, although our knowledge of an object is partial. Thought creates images of whatever it perceives. All these images are maintained by thought. Thought has its own image of conformity as psychic prototypes. The psyche is all this and, being the content of consciousness, consciousness is all this. Evidently, the emergence of consciousness solely depends upon thought. If thought is eliminated, consciousness is also eliminated along with the psyche. Then what remains? This question baffles everyone because it strikes at the root of the most important cause of that which is called life, vis-a-vis desire. Desire stretches beyond all arguments. The Vedas say it is the first cause of creation. It is believed that creation is nothing but manifested desire of the Supreme Being, or the primordial anthropos, assuming various forms as transient functionaries in the sentient world to preserve what is created. The Vedas state that the Supreme Being desired to become many, and became many through the creative energy. Desire is the first cause, and creation is its effect. Desire can be said to be the grosser movement of energy. In other words, it is the matter part of energy. As long as this movement of desire exists in energy, divisions are bound to take place. Any effort to stop the formation of divisions in this extrovert movement cannot end them, but may act as an indirect stimulus to enhance divisions. The resultant modifications of desire and energy cannot be checked for the same reason. Their suppression with authority and controlled discipline may even make them more intense and turbulent and may lead to mental aberration. There is, therefore, no method to eliminate desire except to understand it fully with earnest introspection and relentless vigilance. It is also imperative to have an intense insight into the working of one's own personality and total perception of one's own thought, irrespective of orthodox conditioning and preferential measures. Desire generally flares up when man compares and imitates. If he does not waste energy, however, in unnecessary judgment and measurement, he can face the formidable truth of life in all of its nakedness. In the above-mentioned self-study, man is alone but not isolated. In aloneness, man's relationship with life is inseparable. Being one with life, he has order, space, vulnerability, and omnipotence of action. He is total, and therefore he is religion in himself.
Chapter 8. Religion and Life Energy. Summary. World religions have lost their original unity with the life energy through the separative, egoistic interests of their leaders, who have played upon human fears for their own self-aggrandizement. Offering the illusion of group security, these leaders have localized humanity into smaller subgroups, fostering selfish interests severed from the whole of life. With its simple truths of righteousness and compassion, pure human religion has been torn away from its source, which is pure energy and pure intelligence, the vital life of creation. Space, time, and the cyclic division of energy into phases of creation, preservation, and destruction compose the ostensible nature of this energy. Created beings have identified with the facets of this energy and not the whole of it. A race of beings. This is a story of the author's vision when dwelling in the caves of the Himalayas. The people lived near the Milky Ocean. They had small houses and sizable families. Children played on the sands with gay abandon, and the elders looked upon them with amazement and fun. A happy lot, contentment sparkled on their jubilant faces and healthy contours. Constituting a unique human race, their wants were minimum. They had no cravings. They worshipped the shoreless, milky ocean with great reverence and fear. It was their religion. The ocean was calm and serene, in spite of the huge undulating waves dashing against each other, synchronized with the rise and fall of man. The vastness of the ocean at times bewildered them. They could neither grasp the meaning of its blissful existence nor behold the harmonious nature of its spirit. It was a day of all days. There was festivity and fun. They had camped in the sands to offer their prayers to the ocean. An occasional storm disturbed the festivity. After the storm came calmness, and life continued in the spirit of oneness. An unusual movement started in a section of the crowd. A thought stirred in the mind of an individual. He came out of the crowd and, facing the assembly with dignity, addressed them thus: "We have been staying here for a long time. I am doubtful about our safety. Look at the storm. Look at the huge waves rising in the middle of the ocean. They may swallow us at any moment. It is not safe for us to be here any more. I agree, we cannot live without water, but we can dig ponds at a distant place and fill them with the waters of the ocean. We must shift to a safer place." Several heads nodded in assent. Fear loomed large in every heart. He assumed their leadership, and the crowd followed him. In the course of time, they dug a large pond at what they considered to be a safer place. Carrying water from the milky ocean in pots and vessels, they filled the pond to its brim. After some time, another individual got a different idea. He felt jealous of the first leader and thought of having one more pond at some other place for the benefit of the people he had managed to collect around him. The followers of the second leader dug a second pond. Again, they filled the second pond with the waters of the same milky ocean. Likewise, several ponds were dug at the insistence of different leaders who sprang up like mushrooms. Each pond had a different shape and a different name. One was triangular. One was rectangular. One was square. One was quadrangular. One was circular. People started coming in groups to the ponds earmarked for each group and chanted religious hymns. Time passed. Rains came. The ponds overflowed. Frogs started inhabiting them, and within a short time, the whole atmosphere resounded with the croaking sound of frogs. The music of various hymns was drowned. The voice of religion stifled. People became confused. They forgot the milky ocean and started living amongst the frogs with their croaking sounds. The people became accustomed to the use of the muddy waters of the ponds. The ponds remained unclean, polluted, and turbid. Groups of frogs from other regions started migrating to the ponds. Their croaking became tumultuous. Internal quarreling and group fighting flared up among the people. There was large-scaled destruction. This, in short, is an account of the different religions of man, the partially deserted ponds constituting human religions with their different shapes, signifying religious symbols. Even though man is called a human being, he is far away from the human element. Torn from the main human religion, which is life in eternity, religion is the dug-out pond into which man has dumped selfish gain. Nonetheless, he is desolate and deflowered. The milky ocean of pure human religion, despite its aloneness, remains calm, untouched, and unmoved by the horrible happenings nearby. Can man look back to it for inspiration? It is his true religion, his life. There is no difference between religion and life. Life is what it is, and that is the truth. Pure humanity, which is everywhere, is religion in itself. Apart from the corrupt practices introduced by the so-called religionists, religions are built on simple truths of life, such as truthfulness, righteousness, love, non-injury, harmony, contentment, compassion, kindness, non-covetousness, and so on. These are the gems from the Book of Human Law. The idea of division apparently started in the mind of an individual, and the mass followed it, unmindful of the consequences. The human race is thus torn apart from its source. Its source is humanity, which is also its religion. A human being is a grosser, more concrete manifestation of humanity, and is also the content of humanity. Just as mind, consciousness, God, religion, space, time, etc., cannot be seen with the physical eyes and can only be understood verbally and intellectually, so also humanity cannot be seen physically, but can be recognized through the intellect. Therefore, it is subject to various interpretations according to the imaginative and the intellectual capacities. Just as religion has its source in the unconscious principle of the Supreme Being, humanity has its source in the eternal life principle. Therefore, humanity and religion are not different. They are one and the same in all essentials. Pure religion, which is humanity in its pristine purity, is pure consciousness. It is governed by cosmic law. It is therefore sober, chaste, and orderly. It is vast and steadfast. It is conscious, subconscious, and unconscious. It is wisdom par excellence. It is the omniscient mind of the all-knowing. Man draws energy from humanity. Essentially, humanity is pure intelligence. Therefore, pure intelligence is uncontaminated energy, and humanity is energy. This energy is not the one with which the world is familiar. It is familiar with a fraction of energy called human energy, or manpower, which the world is accustomed to spending indiscriminately in unnecessary activities. When our limited energy diminishes in the course of wanton activities, we try to supplement it by resorting to external exercises, vitamins, minerals, and tonics. In a country like India, this too is possible only for the affluent few. The rest, in their effort to imitate the rich, remain half-starved, get dissipated, and meet untimely deaths. Nevertheless, what we actually try to increase by artificial means is the dormant demonic energy in man. If the natural human energy is released and utilized for the overall goodness of mankind, without subjecting it to incongruous divisions, it is bound to become a perennial source of vitality. This is not a reference to Kundalini or Shaktipat or other such fictitious claims of heritage or tradition. This is a simple affair pertaining to the indestructible and unbound energy prevalent everywhere in its total aspect. This very energy is referred to as the energy of creation, preservation, and destruction. Energy is total in itself. In its totality lies the unity of all life. There are no divergent factors in energy. Divisions start with creation. Creation is the result of desire aimed at preservation and perpetuation of the cause of creation. This very urge is also responsible for the decay and destruction of the effect thus created. Therefore, birth, growth, and death, which are synonymous with creation, preservation, and destruction, respectively, are in the same movement of energy. All the three functions have their root in energy itself, even though the three different functions of the same energy appear to be mysterious phenomena. The very nature of energy is to divide itself into different formations of varying densities. These formations provide for the effective functioning and preservation of creation. An ancient question is whether it is necessary for this energy to strive for its preservation by dividing itself into various effects. According to another supposition is the question whether it is an erroneous shadow aspect of the nature of energy to divide itself into different manifestations, so as to go through different experiences. Then again, the question unfolds as to whether these divisions are merely the projection of the human mind. Supposing that divisibility is the nature of energy, it stands to reason that energy itself is indivisible because the nature of any given entity is different from the entity itself. The nature of a given entity is the functional aspect or set of principles governing the expressions, experience, and behavior of a given entity. This nature of the divisibility of energy becomes dominant when energy associates itself with time and space and manifests in different limited aspects in the cause and effect sequence. Evidently, there is first a cause which is preserved for an effect. The coming into being of that effect destroys the prior cause, and the effect becomes the cause for further effects. This so-called cause and effect system, if one may call it so, operates in a cycle related to space and time, and it is again the illusory nature of energy. In other words, the desire to create, or the phenomena called creation, stands for the cause with manifold extroverted effects. In the course of their other activities on a given plane, these effects identify themselves with environmental and circumstantial factors, get fused, and provide a cause substantiated by extraneous illusory conditions for further effects. The above revelation is equally applicable to man. The term the world, the causal projection of desire, is therefore comprised of the effects of interactions stirred up among such diversified factors and causal effects. Since desire is considered to be the first cause of the world, it is logical to say that desire is also the substratum of the world. In light of the above, what is liberation?
Chapter 9. Liberation and True Religion. Summary. Liberation is the freedom from the secondary desires created by the false self or the worldly personality, put up by corrupted thought, perpetuated by environmental conditioning and biological factors. This false self generates the pursuit of becoming, in itself an object-oriented process of thought, which creates a barrier to the actual self. The yearning for transcendence from the routine or from the traumatic translates most commonly into the pursuit of abstract notions or ideologies, which further and trammel the mind. Yet even non-religious people experience moments of insight and unconditioned consciousness, which bring silence, awe, and choiceless awareness. On the fringe of the divine, these moments yield a glimpse of the true self, heralding the transformational supremacy of the axiom, know thyself. From this flash state of discriminating insight may arise the flow of pure intelligence, which transcends the thought plane. True religion is the movement of passion and harmony. It is the essential nature of humanity with sensitivity, order, vulnerability, and spaciousness. Liberation is not reached by words, deeds, or concepts. To understand liberation requires true perspective and the full comprehension of the prison in which we are incarcerated. In the deeper sense, liberation is freedom from all effects and the images created by effects. The effects have bound us with their golden chains running through the course of life. Caught up in the cause, we are caught up in the effects. Effects are projected desires, and liberation is freedom from desires. The world itself is an outcome of desire, and man is the world. In the beginning, world scriptures state that desire was with God, and God created the world through desire. Therefore, God is not separate from desire. The concept of God is a concept of thought. Obviously, God is not in the concept. The moment the concept is removed, God is. Evidently, liberation is to drop all concepts. When we are told to realize God through certain methods, are we not asked to realize desire also? In another context, we are told to give up desires. If one gives up all desires and becomes desireless, can one function in the world the way one has been functioning for thousands of years? Can one become desireless at all? At this stage of inquiry, neither accepting nor rejecting the scriptural injunctions and traditional approaches, one ponders and looks. All the teachings and scriptural injunctions have not changed the structure of the human personality, which is chaotic and corrupt. The personality clings to these modes of escape and conforms to established patterns, making man more narrow and selfish over the ages. For liberation to come, a radically different approach is needed. Corruption is the main problem of the world. Corruption crept in when man started identifying with the false self put up by thought. In the course of time, people became isolated from the real self and started living as second-hand human beings under the pretense of the false self, imitating, conforming, and seeking according to its dictates. Even though man is said to have been created in the image of God, he has drifted away from the source by following the course of desires generated by the false self. The desire of becoming has dominated the style of life in the world. Becoming is a process of thought and is object-oriented. It centers on the innumerable images which are released continuously by the mechanism of the mind-brain-thought complex. The continuous association with this complex process has not only blurred the vision of the real self, but has rendered people incapable of understanding the self in its own light. The barrier exists in spite of the striving to seek the truth through various concepts such as God, religion, yoga, and so on. In spite of all efforts, people have not succeeded in understanding the bewildering phenomenon of the thought-manufactured images, nor the adverse influence of their own mental images. As a result, human beings can neither solve their own problems or those of the world. Apart from these images, there are other influences in life such as biological factors, social factors, environmental factors, political factors, and so on. The entire consciousness of man is conditioned. A part of consciousness is engaged in routine matters. The rest of it is yearning for something sensational to come its way to drown the monotony of the routine. The demarcating boundary between these two parts, the operational and the temporarily non-operational parts of consciousness, gives rise to a feeling of transcendence over the contents of consciousness. These contents are violence, jealousy, hatred, anger, greed, pain, pleasure, desire for more, comparison, competition, aggression, etc., etc., etc. This non-operational region of consciousness temporarily goes out of time and hence out of the reach of thought. In this region of partial vacuity, aspirational motives start infiltrating from the border of active consciousness, seeking the higher or the other. It is apparent that the other is just a conception of thought, improvised to escape from the boredom of routine activities. All abstract notions, notwithstanding their validity in certain aspects of life, provide a strong feeling of psychological security to the untrammeled mind, which resides in yet another phase of conditioned consciousness. To know this tremendous truth is to understand the futility of running away from what is. Out of this understanding is born discrimination, called intelligence. Discrimination is not an instrument in the hands of past knowledge. Whenever this intelligence streaks through the peripheral blankness of consciousness at regular intervals, there is an unfoldment of unusual experiences taking place, bringing peace and silence to the otherwise turbulent mind. The salient feature of this state is that, for a moment, the mind is emptied of its content, and therefore it feels at ease with the surroundings and the influence of circumstances. Here the mind remains choiceless. A choiceless mind is a religious mind. But this is a flash state, coming as a bolt from the blue and catching man unawares. Does not last for long. Notwithstanding its fleeting nature, it creates a sobering effect on the consciousness, and the heart surges out of its confinement. This split-second experience comes to everybody, even to those who are called irreligious. This instant state gives rise to a feeling quality which almost touches the fringe of divinity. Memory holds this supreme experience and causes its abstract repetitions at opportune times, leading to good acts and repentance over bad ones. Man is a mixture of good and bad, with an inherent quality of repentance. Because of this, even a criminal repents at times and turns good. It is therefore evident that the memory of this transcendental experience serves as an inspiration to aspire for the higher. It also provides a breakthrough to the other, or the divine, which is man as self and all self. Even a fractional glimpse of the divine is sufficient to transform sinners into saints. Can one imagine what would happen if man were to avail of this totally? Just as all rivers flow towards the ocean, also all the arguments flow towards the self. The key to life depends upon self-knowledge. Man has severed his connection with the voice of humanity, which declares in unequivocal terms, "Know thyself." Man has severed his connection with the voice of humanity, which declares in unequivocal terms, "Know thyself." Understanding this simple statement of truth has the tremendous potential to change the entire living condition of man and society. This does not involve tracking down the proverbial golden deer or chasing the wild goose. Imaginary concepts and methods are far away from life. As such, they block the light of the self. This situation has brought in corruption, and corruption has chain reactions. If one man is corrupt, the entire society becomes corrupt. When society becomes corrupt, the whole social order becomes corrupt. When the social order becomes corrupt, the entire nation becomes corrupt. And when the nation becomes corrupt, the whole world becomes corrupt. This is the diabolical state of corruption. In this diabolical state of corruption, is there a meaning to the ideologies of morality and the principles of coexistence? Is it possible for man to have a total look at the shoreless milky ocean of true religion, which is true life? To its folly and fall, humanity has drifted away from the source of life. The return of true religion cannot possibly happen unless man becomes intensely sensitive and vulnerable. It can only be understood by intelligence and not by the thought-conditioned false self. Intelligence may give the required insight into the very structure of the world in which man is struggling to live, side by side with all its problems and petulance. This insight is only possible if man reaches beyond the thought plane psychologically. By so doing, one discovers an association with the witnessing elements and their coordinated conscious gestations. From these conscious gestations, pure intelligence flows perennially as activated pure energy. This energy abounds in what are called mystic experiences, with their undulating movements arising from the fount of the unconscious. These experiences may have different meanings to different persons. To one who can understand the language of the unconscious, these are true forms of life with their messages of eternal existence. Their voice is the inner voice. Their energy is the untapped energy of bliss. Humanity is religion in itself. It is a total movement of harmony. In harmony, there is no acquisition nor hoarding. It has neither twists nor turns. It has order, vulnerability, and space. Since it is total, it is not ruled by desire. Therefore, it is beyond all concepts, divisions, and man-made religions. In total harmony, the question of the known or the unknown does not arise. Quality, attributes, and qualifications have nothing to do with it. In this supreme state, the difference between the conscious and the unconscious ceases, and the mind becomes emptied of its contents. Here, all barriers vanish, all limitations end, and all divisions are transcended. This is the state of true religion, and religion is humanity. This is the shoreless, milky ocean, abiding always in the now. Chapter 10. Life and Cosmic Law. Summary. The law of the universe, the flow of life, ever remains untouched and uncontaminated by the fleeting changes marked upon its surface, which in part of themselves, without labeling such giving as duty or obligation. The critical question for human beings is not whether they can attain the objects of their desires or wishes. It is rather whether they can imbibe of the cosmic law and thereby live in harmony with the whole of life. Flowing like a holy river, the essential law of humanity is an unconcerned movement of action in goodness. The river, the holiest of the holies. It is the river and not the bank that matters. The river makes the bank and sets its lawful course. Even the river is unmindful of the bank, so are the people. Under the blue canopy, men, women, children, and mendicants bathe, talk, pray, chant, and meditate beside the waters. A mist is clearing. The sun has risen behind the distant mountains in the east. The whole earth is covered with a carpet of mellow light. Trees skirting the bank are bathed in the golden light of the dawn. All are happy in their own moods and thoughts. It is a holy river, the holiest of the holies. Winter is in the prime of youth, and people have come from several parts of the country to wash away their sins accumulated over the years. Drawing a screen over their routine life, they have forgotten their pains, their sorrows, their miseries, and even their pleasures. Although this is a temporary phase in their lives, they are in a mood of spirited devotion. Gone is their tension, gone is their woe. The very name of the river has an electrifying effect. But the river is not concerned with anything. It is flowing in a prayerful mood with its soulful music. The gentle ripples and the harmonious waves rise and fall at regular intervals. A few cranes, scattered here and there over a deserted patch of land, intently watch without any movement, as though they are in deep meditation. On a protruded rock in the middle of the river, a flock of crows are perched without making their usual noise. An enormous quantity of water has stagnated in a depression near the western bank of the river, which is muddy and dense. A water snake raises its head surreptitiously and disappears, leaving a trail behind, a momentary mark on the water. Then the mark disappears completely as the river flows continuously in aloneness, untouched and uncontaminated. The river is law unto itself. It has no marks or scars on its bosom. Its holiness is cosmic law, which has neither choice nor prejudice. It flows of its own accord toward the immeasurable. According to the law of the immeasurable, the sun gives heat and light unasked. The wind blows of its own volition. Rain comes of its own accord. Trees cast shade and yield fruit. All the solar and cosmic systems run in order. The cosmic law, the law of the immeasurable, is called Dharma. This is also the law of humanity, the law of the gods, and the law of all sentient beings. The male and female principles are the products of this law. In the cosmic sense, the sky is the male and the earth is the female. The sky releases heat, light, wind, and water from its limitless vault of accumulation. The earth holds, yields, and disperses. They do not do these things as duty, but as their dharma. Duty is a word used by human beings for their cold behavior. There is no love in it. But dharma is the very essence of love. Can man imbibe of this dharma? In spite of temples, churches, holy rivers, holy places, holy men, and wish-yielding trees, life is in the doldrums. All activities are prompted by motives. People want to wash away their sins in the holy rivers. They want their lives blessed by holy men. They want their wishes fulfilled by wish-yielding trees. Every action has a motive. Every move has a wish. Wanting everything to be done by others, people want to remain enclosed in a world of fancies, committing all the wrongs they can think of. A river may not wash away sins. A tree may not fulfill wishes. A holy man may not liberate from miseries. People continue to have faith in their concepts and feel secure in their faith. It is good to have faith, but it is also necessary to understand it. Faith, as it is generally understood, is based upon fear. It is built around miracles and gains. Afraid of incurring God's wrath and becoming unsuccessful in life, man goes to temples, churches, and holy places. People go to a holy man out of their fear of incurring the Holy One's displeasure if they fail to go. Man believes in the prowess of holy men, trying to follow them in the belief that they are realized souls. Besides holy men and godly men, there are do-gooders and philanthropists. Man has respect for them because of his fears and hollowness of life. Everybody in the world has certain desires. Some have more and some less. Toward the evening of life, rich men want to give away excess wealth to charity, but only after amply providing for even the highly inflated wants of at least 10 succeeding generations of family, so that their name and fame are established in this world and they can gain a place in heaven hereafter. Rich men, although during their heyday depriving others of needs and wants, of course feel for the suffering of the poor. In order that the arrogant demands of ego may be fulfilled during their lifetimes, they want to be called philanthropists. Building temples and helping in the administration of ashrams and monasteries, their names are permanently carved on the marble plaques put up at such places. Out of pity, poor men also contribute their mite unostentatiously for the public cause, curtailing their needs and suffering. Also thus, they want to gain merit. Men have several contrasting traits. Some hoard money, some hoard knowledge, some hoard everything that comes their way. Because of such traits embedded in the consciousness, life is full of tension, guilt, greed, prejudice, and violence. Every man has an axe to grind. Attention is concentrated on the results of actions. A businessman will not attend to business unless sure of considerable gains. The worker will not go to a place of work if not assured of remuneration. A priest will not go to the temple if unsure of adequate returns for his labor. Everything done in this world has a motive, and motive breeds problems. Still full of desires and cravings, a forest dweller has problems of survival, although wearing a loincloth and living on nuts and berries. He has his own desires and cravings. A city dweller has problems, although showing off in the most modern outfits. Both have the same mental inclinations, though living in different circumstances. Both have disturbed minds. A worldly person wants to enjoy the peace of the forest. A monk dwelling in the mountain caves wants to preach in the city for name and fame. A mendicant wants to have the pleasure of conversing with God. A worldly man wants to roll and revel in worldly pleasures. Since pleasure is always accompanied by pain, both have their sufferings. One suffers because of external poverty, and another suffers because of inner poverty. There is no balance in either. All have desires, goals, and concepts. All want to achieve and keep on running after their chosen goal, whether it is God or money. With all this incongruity, man wants to escape from exacting circumstances. Although causing his own bondage, he wants to be free from bondage. He wants to be released from misery and tension, although having created them. In order to be free, man visits holy places, confesses before priests and imaginary gods, and weeps over the shoulders of others. Man is hardly out of tension. The desire for accumulation has made man more secretive, wanting to hide possessions from others. He raises high walls and isolation takes grip. Life has lost its space. The mind is narrow and shoddy. Unless there is space, there is no release. The whole universe is based upon the principle of release. If there is release, there is no tension. Truthful people have no fear because they are factual and not secretive. Being open and frank, they have nothing to hide. To be out of tension, human life should be exposed to the light of intelligence and wisdom, just as nature itself is exposed to sunlight and fire, having no secrets of its own. Exposure and release are essential to life. They make life transparent and holy. Life is essentially what it is. A major religion in the world urges man in every stage to walk the path of Dharma and to speak the truth. This simple saying adds a great meaning to life. If man follows it scrupulously and adheres to his own Dharma, discord or disunity would not exist in the world. The Dharma, or the law of man, is an unconcerned movement of action and goodness. It flows like the holy river, unmindful of what floats or who takes a bath in its waters. Its benevolent effect is equally available to everybody. Although everything germinates in darkness, movement and growth are towards the light. Under the cover of the earth, a seed sprouts in the darkness. A fetus grows in the darkness of the womb and makes its way toward the light. So also every action of man should move towards the light. In this process, action loses its dark shadows and becomes pure. Anger, jealousy, greed, craving, pain, pleasure, and misery generally germinate in the dark shadows of consciousness. They are all energy. Because they are imprisoned by different centers, they create tension, and due to tension, man gets dissipated and decays. If this energy is channeled into the cosmic law as life force, every life will run its full course smoothly, without impediment. Life will then be holy, the holiest of holies. And now a poem. The sun is about to set in the west. Golden rays have already touched the western horizon. The earth is once again under the golden carpet of mellow light. Trees are swaying in the cool breeze. Birds are returning to their nests. People are preparing to leave the river to its numinous silence, and the river, the holiest of holies, is flowing unmindful of itself towards the immeasurable.
The Fall of the Flame, a short story by Gayatri, Patricia Brown, Ph.D. And there is one who holds this falling endlessly gently in his hands. Quotation from Autumn by Marie Rainier Rilke. The funeral cart angled up the mountain path. The body's copper skin shone as brilliantly as the polished sundial in the center of the village. Life radiated from the corpse, as if the flame of the Creator lived on inside, waiting to be consummated with the flames of the pyre above. Hold to the flame, spoke his twin, before early death stole him away. The pang of grief passed momentarily as Lam remembered his brother's words. The flame came back with force, overwhelming him with love for the great God they all served. He stood erect, a figure of haunting dignity, against the mountainside of dense foliage. Lush trees cast a deep velvet hue against the rocky cliffs in front of him. Prominent canyon walls reflected a patina of rust and gold. In the valley below, the elongated semicircle of the village adobe wall caught the morning sunlight. The men were gladdened by the beauty of the sunrise with its choruses of calling birds and wildlife. A flock of wild swan flew in front of them. In his own flight of mechanical musing, Lam wondered about the water wheel and aqueduct recently constructed, puzzling about the recent burst of irritability of his favorite co-worker and friend, Vam. He wondered if his friend was feeding the flame in himself, or if he had let down in his prayers due to the greater workload of late. As his thoughts returned to the flame, it tugged on his heart, gently, insistently, passionately. "Do not weep for me, Lam," commanded the elder twin. Ram was 2 minutes older than his brother, but somehow had always seemed wiser by years. "We are 2 parts of one person," Ram had said. "I am more of the spirit, but contain a spark of you. You are more of the earth, but contain a spark of me. As long as we are true to each other and to the Great One, the order of harmony is sustained." Ram drew a circle with his forefinger into the soft earth. 2 fish formed the borders to each other's body. One was white with a black eye. The other was black with a white eye. Ram's words always filled Lam with adoration and awe. Spirit loves the earth as its own divine spouse, and the earth loves its creatures with the love of the spirit, Ram's teachings echoed. If earth is in devotion to that love, then the creation flows in a smooth current from the great void and back again in one movement. We live life to bear this beauty of creation. The Holy One sustains us with the flame, an unceasing flow of love and ecstasy, radiating and unending as the rays of the sun, the outward messenger of the inner being. Ram continued, "This flame, tended by the delicate awareness of worship, is kindled anew every moment in the heart and sustains us through all the changes of this earthly life, which otherwise would cause us great and unbearable agony. Keep your flame, my brother, for yourself, for me, and for all sentient beings, and you do a service to no less than the great harmony itself." Lam bowed his head as Ram continued. "A day will come when men will close the door to this secret chamber, not wanting to bear the power of this beauty, and fall into a downward path of senseless entanglement." Lam glanced up sharply as his brother's eyes filled with tears, turning upward with the force of a vision descending upon him. These visions had come more frequently of late, and Lam had worried over their effect upon his brother's body. Prophets and healers often willingly sacrifice their bodies to bring guidance, admonishments, and blessings to the people. He wasn't even surprised the day his brother announced, "I will not be long for this world, my heart." The Great One called with irresistible insistence, "The sacrifice I make, you must also share." Lam's eyes filled with an unfamiliar liquid. He had never grieved long for the physical forms of those he loved, knowing they would live again and meet again in another time or another world. He had received many visitations as well of their astral forms before they traveled on. "I will return to you, Lam." With a slight tremor, Ram held his brother's hand, "as your beloved, and you will know the greatest joy possible for a man to know on this earth." "And I will face the greatest test," Lam answered in his heart with a resounding utterance of prophecy welling up from the oracle of the flame. The body would not burn. They plied it with oils and surrounded the raised grave with the driest kindling they could find. Finally, they all left except for Lam, who kept vigil until the fire lit and he saw it through. Given the present requirements, the sun ceremony was more elaborate than usual, but they always looked forward to the observance. knowing how it would renew the flame within them, purifying their minds from the accumulation of irritability, hormones, and moods that inevitably accompanied life on earth. Many of these men remembered life before they took on earth bodies. Many of them had full or partial sight of other worlds and times. Many also had the gift of prophecy. None regarded these gifts as their own, but as extensions of the will of the Creator, whose principle for manifesting these gifts was grounded in the greatest benevolence. It was incomprehensible to use one's gift for selfish gain. Each person had experienced this agonizing pain once in their childhoods, in some fitting time and place, and each knew from direct association how terrible was the loss of the flame, how grateful they were at its timely return. Each understood the wisdom that led to the experience of living death, and how primary to their lives was the keeping of the flame. Lam turned his contemplation to the ceremony of the sun. All 12 men stood in a circle around the pyre of their beloved friend. Their hands were placed lightly on each other's shoulders as a jar of sandal paste was passed around. They took a small amount of paste, held it to the sun, and then carefully touched the forehead and chest of the person to their left. The movement of the group followed a clockwise direction. All was carried on in strict silence. Each turned his awareness inward and felt the brilliant fire growing warmly within. A shock wave jolted the group as they vibrated with the increasing intensity of the flame. The energy undulated 3 times in a clockwise direction. At the last wave, they would burst into a joyful Om to the Creator. Each man transformed into a gusher of energy, overflowing with rhythmic waves visibly oscillating from their bodies. Affection radiated from their eyes. They felt no need for physical display, which somehow would break the circuit. In the fear not gesture, each man raised one palm to each other. Gathering in a line, they followed the serpentine trail down the mountain, drawing the funeral cart with them. The wave continued to pulsate through the group during the journey down, tenderly licking at their minds and hearts with a vibration of unspeakable joy. Exuding the fullness of the flame, the men approached the gate of the village with contagious exultation. At one touch, their wives swooned with bliss, having prepared themselves for this moment with fresh spring waters, immersing themselves in the deep blue grotto below the mountain. They plied themselves with scented oils and garlands, wearing newly woven garments of dazzling white, embroidered with their awakening names. Many children were conceived on this day, growing up to be prime contributors to their people and serving as the keepers of the flame in the dark time to come. After their time together, every man and woman prayed their silent gratitude to Ram's legacy. Ram had restored the power of the flame ceremony, as he knew he was destined to do from the moment of his birth. The flame has its life in the individual and in the collective, Ram taught. But a time will come when many will turn away and refuse to take the necessary time for the purification of the earthly form and psyche, which allows for the renewal of the flame. They will consider these moments time-consuming and a deterrent from their work and entertainments in their haste to construct material circumstances. When they discover quick and temporary ways to ease the accumulation of unease that comes from existence in gross matter, then the time will be nigh for greater secrecy about the exalted life, and even someday about the flame itself. This will be a sad time on earth, Lam. and my sacrifice will be needed again to allow the continuance of the flame, at least in the worthy ones who make an effort to resist the coming cycle of greed. After 3 days, the fire finally stayed lit. The first chill of changing seasons hung in the air. The mist was heavier than usual, cloaking the valley in a veil of cloud, and the dew on the leaves, full in the height of summer, dripped to the ground. Billows of fragrant smoke wafted gently to the sky, while the villagers in Vrindov below watched and prayed tearfully at the passing of their great friend. Lam sat holding the flame and his loneliness for his brother with both sides of his heart. He allowed the flame to consume his loneliness as he knew Ram would want him to do. His tears fell freely, an early summer shower, long enough to release the heaviness in the air. As the fire died, he scooped some ash from the center of the mound, smeared some on his forehead, touched a tiny speck to his tongue, and poured the rest into a small beaded pouch he wore around his neck. He would wait for a sign to pour the ashes into sacred waters. When Lam returned to Vrindov, he was greeted by Vam, who sadly announced that their friend and healer, the town medicine man, met with an accident. The doctor had traveled to a nearby town to aid another medicine man in some marital problems. Upon his return journey, he was struck by lightning. His family had found him with his horse charred and blackened by a huge oak near the river. Oddly, his satchel had been thrown some distance from the bodies. It contained some herbs they could not recognize and bottles of liquids and ointments, but no one knew what to do with them, so they burnt them with the body. There was also a peculiar totem, beaded with black stones and thorns, which looked like a woman goddess undergoing a painful birth. Lam was somehow repulsed by it, but he did not know why. The deceased doctor had another sun ceremony for his funeral, but this time they were confused by the evil omens in the sky that darkened the sun, refusing admittance to its rays. They all left, not cleansed and uplifted, but strangely disturbed. The next few years left Lam in perplexity. In spite of the awesome effect of Ram's sun ceremony, the people began to forget. A number of loved ones died sudden and sometimes painful deaths, a rare occurrence in earlier times. Trade with other tribes people brought in new ideas and new fancies. The village chieftain, Lef, took on 3 wives, an unprecedented maneuver that created major turmoil. Naturally, his first wife became jealous and hurt about the matter, although the chieftain himself reassured her that he only wanted to create more children. He had been overwhelmingly exhilarated over the birth of his twins, 2 strong boys, the outcome of Ram's legendary sun ceremony. He claimed he did not want to tire her with more pregnancies, but she never understood his desire for more children, since they already had a large family, and the last 2 boys were as strong-minded as they were strong-bodied. Lef took a fancy to 2 young sisters who visited with their father from another village. And after paying an unusually large dowry to their father, he brought them proudly into his home, where their presence caused his family no end of distress. The family's constant bickering and quarreling led to a perpetual state of fatigue and irritability. He began to get angry over small matters, and in time, his first wife refused him intimacies. "Come in," murmured the visiting medicine man, nodding to the flap on his tent as Lef stooped over to enter. Mar was an expert in the herbs of many lands. He had traveled to the Far East, gathering exotic plants and tubers, mushrooms, and seeds. Experimenting on himself, he had discovered that many of these flora had amazing effects on the mind as well as the body. In his enthusiasm, he quite forgot the one healer to whom he was taught to pray. Putting his natal religion aside, he consumed himself with his experiments until he had quite altered his body chemistry as well as his own psyche. The accumulation, although gradually produced over time, had completely changed his personality. Although he didn't seem to care when his wife and children tired of his violent temper outbursts and refused to travel with him anymore. He had forgotten his responsibility to them anyway. His wife luckily found refuge with a villager's family, making a livelihood for herself and her children with her weaving. She sighed in gratitude that she no longer had to live with the stranger who used to be her husband. Lev knew none of this history of Mar's character as he entered the tent. He knew only that Mar was reputed to be a skilled healer with many new compresses and methods to ease tension and restore health. Some of these herbs had remarkable and immediate effects, more dramatic than the old ways of healing, which combined milder plants with serious prayers, meditations, fasts, and ablutions. That man has completely lost his contact with the flame, thought Lam, as he backed away from the medicine man and watched the villagers swarm around. These persons themselves seemed also to abandon the old ways. Lam was surprised to see a priest among the group take Mar aside into his temple. Lam could not contain the nausea that overtook his body, and he had to walk down to the lake and douse himself with water. Yet the townspeople were taught to tolerate each other's differences, so those who responded the same way merely kept away from Mar, who happily took up indefinite residence. Lev walked into Mar's extravagant house, even though his flame echoed with a familiar warning at danger. He was tired. His wife did not stop complaining about the two young sisters, but Lev was a stubborn man and he did not like to admit a mistake. She let him know that he would have been able to take the girls as daughters and then marry them off again to some of the several young men who eyed them eagerly when they first came to the village. But the exhilaration of creating his twin sons was such a heady event in his mind, he kept seeking a repetition of the experience again and again, never quite able to recreate the magic of that moment. Forgetting the source of the bliss, he lost his gratitude. Lev, do not let yourself be consumed by greed for joy, years ago Ram had warned him sadly, knowing beforehand what Lev's response would be. The Holy One only bestows this on the worthy who keep to the way. Joy is a gift like the sight or prophecy, given to a person so that he may be able to share the benevolence of the Great One with others. Lev laughed. He felt that no one, not even God, should hold authority over him. He was born from a line of great princes, and in power he would always remain. Early in his leadership, he established a new form of government. Unknown to the simple village people, these changes consolidated his power. When he began to make significant material improvements in the village and increase his own comforts as well as everyone else's, no one complained much. His political affairs occupied him way too much for him to notice the hollow pain in his being as the flame began to wither. He found women to satisfy his need for life. What he lost in himself, he found easy to draw from his wives. But his first wife never forgave him his transgression, causing him endless misery. Rationalizing his feelings as understandable, he began to harbor homicidal thoughts for the mother of his children. And when she scratched my face the other night as I came to her bed, Lev continued his story to Mar, I could have strangled her and been done with it. Mar listened sympathetically, remembering his own wife's bitter complaints and thanking the gods he was done with her. Ah, yes, he nodded. Women sometimes suffer from hormonal imbalance. Then they are horrible to live with. Women with such difficulties often refuse treatment, even though I have some very good remedies for them, Mark continued authoritatively, as he thought of his hellish headaches and imagined himself forcing his wife to drink a smelly concoction. But clearly, I can help you modify the intensity of your pain. You will be able to persevere in your duties and not be troubled by her. Mar motioned to Lev to sit. I will prepare something that will relieve your headaches, your violent feelings, and your emotional turmoil. You will be quite pleased with the results. Mar smiled as he rummaged through his potions, selecting a few items. He puzzled over one, since he had not fully researched the results, and then glanced at Lev. He is a big man, thought Mar. It will not have as strong an effect on him as it did on me. After grinding several seeds, he mixed them with a dark liquid. The bowl gave off a sickening sweet odor, which caused Lev to gag. I am accustomed to doing things I dislike, Lev prepared himself stoically before he swallowed the mixture. She stood in the morning light, an angel from another world. Lam had never seen anyone more alive and numinous. Dancing on quicksilver ripples, the light became more dazzling by its reflection in the blue grotto. He held his breath, not wanting to disturb the moment, not wanting her to catch sight of him quite yet. Wading into the water, her white robe floating on the silken surface of the water, she whispered a prayer of love to all the creatures around the grotto. He could see fish of rainbow colors jumping around her diaphanous robe. Goldfish leaped to her hands as she fed them bits of bread and seeds. An ibis flew down in front of her to catch a crust, arcing in a circle over the water before returning to a hidden nest in an overhanging willow. In a burst of clear tones, the angel's voice sang out to the water, to the sun, to the earth, to its creatures. The creatures in turn responded with a rare reverberation of love calls, interweaving melodies and rhythmic variations with unfathomable complexity and harmony. The flame in Lam leapt in delight. He knew that she would be his beloved. Yet she was so young, barely 16, he judged, by the customary number of ribbons in her hair, and he now was twice her age, remembering as he mused, in a jolt of awareness, that she must have been born the day of the sun ceremony. He could not place her father. How could such an angel have escaped his sight for so long? Then he remembered Ham, Ram's dearest friend, who left the village with his family to explore the gem mines hidden deep within the mountain's belly. Ham's family had fortunately escaped the moral deterioration of the village and its consequent increasing tension. They had lived a relatively secluded life on the mountainside. This angel has been raised among the forest creatures, he reflected. She had missed the strange betrayal of the young girls in the village, who were now being taken into polygamous marriages, while many of the younger men looked on in anguish. They could not offer the girls the comforts of the larger homes, and many of the girls no longer protested their parents' peremptory decisions and began themselves to shun the younger men for the indulgent luxuries of these estates. Once small family dwellings now grew to the size of fortresses, housing expanded numbers of wives and progeny. Lam was so intent on his formulations that he did not notice when she turned around to stare at him. This time it was he who was captured in her gaze. He was shaken from his pondering by the leaping delight of his flame. The bliss overwhelmed him in a way it had not done for a long time. Bathed in this ecstasy, his eyes met hers for the first time. They each drank in the deep wonder of an ancient love. Faces passed in front of his eyes with astounding rapidity. Old men, young boys, women, queens, kings, priests shattered his vision into 1,000 memories. Transfixed in primal awe, they felt something watching from above. She too was remembering. Their flames reached out in passionate embrace and intertwined before their inner sight. The myriad fragments of faces and times whirled before him. He felt dizzy, shattered, annihilated. His body began to tremble with a volcanic rumble from an obscure and mysterious root inside the earth itself. Just as the vision turned to total darkness and he was about to faint, she held out her hand. In an instant, he was by her side, knowing he had always been there. They each breathed in the profound fragrance of the moment. Lam began to speak, but she touched her fingers to his lips, and he fell silent. They listened to the flowing waterfall, the quiet bubbling of the endless waters around them. A great peace descended on the valley, and everyone looked up from their work, puzzled and awestruck by the mysterious radiance of the moment, created from the reunion of two principles older than time. In spite of his unabashed masculinity, Ham embraced his old friend with the bounding joy of a puppy and welcomed him inside his simple dwelling. "Come into my small abode, Lam," Ham laughed good-naturedly. "I am not so affluent as my neighbors, but my wife makes a good home for us." Rhea nodded warmly as Lam entered. She was tall and stately, a slender contrast to Ham's seasoned and muscular bulk. Ham was 10 years her senior, but looked more like 20 due to his years of heavy labor in the sun and in the mines. His hands were firm and square, well placed to handle the heavy tools required for digging out raw gemstones and hewing them into the brilliant reflectors Lam saw before him. Both Rhea and Ham and their daughter Ais worked these gems into artful designs for headdresses, breastplates, rings, bracelets, necklaces, tiaras, and crystal orbs for the sight. Ais's surpassed everyone's in sheer elegance and creativity, but she never seemed to show any sense of ownership or pride in the product. "My daughter is one of a kind," smiled Ham, full of parental pride. Suddenly Ham knew why Lam had come. He knew also what his response would be. Ais spoke quietly for the first time since Lam had met her. With a peculiar resonance, much like her singing, she began, "Father, this is the man I must marry. It has been ordained before my birth. I have seen his face many times before now, and I can tell you he is my one true love." Ham and Rhea were embarrassed by Ais's forward action, and Lam rushed in quickly to allay their distress. "Please, Ham, Rhea, there is no need for formality, certainly not to please me. These are indeed strange times. All I can say is that I am grateful that the flame lives on inside me, thanks to Ram's clear direction. I know beyond doubt that the flame lives on within Ais. What we experienced at the grotto instantly blessed the whole village, though they know not from whence the energy arose. And since no one seems interested in the source, I'm afraid their ignorance shall remain. Ham and Lamb nodded gravely to each other, each privately imagining Mars' strange glinting eyes as he ministered to their village chieftain. Lef's drunken stupors, with his uncontrollable fits of irrationality, had shocked and perplexed the whole village. No one quite knew what to do, and their own confusion and respect for their chieftain paralyzed them to inaction. I'm beginning to wonder if it will be necessary to leave Vrindav. Ham picked up on Lam's unspoken question. But of course I'll keep attempting to save my peace in the meetings. Everyone is so impatient. They just don't seem to want to listen. They want quick solutions, but refuse to return to the way of reverence. They leave frustrated and angry, and the next day more people line up to Mars' front door. Both men contemplated the gravity of the situation, sadly remembering Ram's prognostications and the sun ceremony at his funeral. There's nothing to do but keep to the flame and the feeding of the flame. Lam's clear voice broke the silence. Eyes smiled radiantly and looked expectantly at her father. Of course, if you two wish to have a bonding, it would be our delight. Ham glanced at Rhea while he pronounced his blessing to the man and the young woman. Rhea smiled compassionately at Lam, with an instant knowing that somehow this union would not be easy for Lam. Eyes sat perfectly still, a perfected statue of the goddess, glowing coolly like an alabaster lamp. Lam took her long, graceful fingers on his palm, momentarily reeling with the soothing swelling of her touch. In better times, Rhea broke in, we would have a grand festival. Everyone would participate in the intertwining of the flames. But now people are so confused, it would be a terrible interference to have them attend. I think it would be better to have a simple ceremony up in the mountains, with just ourselves and a few select loved ones. Ice brushed Lam's cheek. The Great One has given us to each other, and we shall never find another to replace this bond. In the profundity of the moment, Lam could not speak. A lump filled his throat with an untold grief that made no sense at all. Ice saw his love and grief in one movement and knew that no other man would ever love her the way he did. No one was capable of making as great a sacrifice to love as the noble figure with his dark curls who stood before her. She shuddered. They held hands, looking down upon the verdant valley of their people, knowing a portentous future lay before them. The midwife wiped her hands on the soft, warm cloth Rhea brought her from the heating room. Snow fell in a constant torrent outside, seeping in through the crack in the open window insisted upon by ice, while Lam paced restlessly by her side. She had fainted in the strain of the birth. Lam had held her hand through the ordeal, holding on to the flame and his composure by looking into Ice's brilliant azure eyes. Her ash mink hair fell on the pillow like flowing streams of liquid silver and silk. Even in disarray, she looked perfectly placed and breathtaking, her ethereal beauty consoling and surrounding him. But when she fainted, he stood up, perplexed and panicked. Mar has a good medicine to make the baby come, the midwife drawled. And here, she slipped an odd-shaped mushroom into his pocket. Here's something for your nerves. Maya was a kindly older woman, well skilled at her trade. She had studied with Mar because he was the only doctor in Vrindav. Her repertoire of potions had increased, but she no longer relied on her exemplary healing touch and ancient prayers. Lam startled with an unfamiliar shock of rage. I want nothing to do with that man. He's not a human being. He uses others to get wealth, relieving them in a temporary way, and then sending them back to wreak havoc on their families. Maya's eyes formed tiny slits on either side of her bulbous nose. Lam went on, his worry increasing his vehemence. Don't you see, Maya? That man is an evil tide in our life. We are no longer a people of the flame. We are a sad and scavenging lot. And this had a lot to do with that man who you say can help this birth. Maya warned him. Lam, you had better cease while you yet preserve words unsaid, or I tell you, you'll regret it later. There are penalties for bad talking. Ice moaned from the bed, her round belly hard and tight. She clenched her hands to the bed clothing. Lam rushed to her, the sense of foreboding increasing with every labored breath from his wife. Lam, you must keep to the flame, she whispered, calmly through her pain. Whatever happens, you must remember everything you have learned. Nothing happens without the benevolent will of the Almighty One. Not one debt to the Great One will go unpaid. Not one leaf is stirred without the Supreme One restoring it back. She sighed into the pain. Lam patted and kissed her with the greatest delicacy. Until she had entered his life, he had never known this love of the beloved, granted rarely to any being. Their 2 years together were pure illumination. Even his exalted memories of his time with Ram paled before the supreme joy of his moments with his wife. Why do they not listen? Isis' question came back to Lam as he sat by her side, remembering how they had returned to share the news of the conception with the villagers, who stared in dullness and distraction, anxious to return to their daily demands. The sun ceremony passing between man and wife that day revealed the great vision of the whole of creation, shared between them as they kneeled before the rising sun, surrounded by flowers and ambrosial perfumes. Unable to cease weeping, they reached for each other, uniting in a tidal flame. A voice told them that the child would save the people, that he would preserve the eternal current of the great passion, which bears the beauty with majesty, a passion which gave itself again and again to sustain what had arisen from the core of itself. Noticing the people's doubtful scorn, something in Ice began to die from that day forward. Lam could see it in spite of his denial. Seeing how they received the telling, he could not reassure her falsely. What has gone wrong, he kept asking himself. First it was a question echoing her own, but now as he gazed down at his wife, he knew that her condition was somehow part of the whole fall of his people. Ice again fainted. The midwife pressed him. Mar has a potion which can make the baby come quickly, so it will not tire her out. Do you want me to send for it? How can I even consider using his help, Mia? Lam implored. Mia fell silent and left the room to see if she could reason with Rhea. Ice stirred again and held Lam's hand. He comes, and I must leave you now, my beloved. Lam panicked through his tears. No, don't leave me, Ice. You cannot. You must seek my mother's help to raise him. Take him to her. Call him Ra. Ice's whisper faded as she applied her last ounce of strength to the birth. He caught Ra with both hands, carefully clearing one arm and then the other. Lam looked up to Ice as Ra let out his first cry. Even before he held her pulse, he knew she was dead. He took Ra to Rhea, wrapped in a soft Angora blanket, looked at Ice's mother with an anguish grimace, and returned to the birthing room, where he crumpled at the bedside. Lam would not let anyone enter the room, in spite of Rhea's anxious inquiries. He could not move. He could not speak. He could not find the flame. His mind had plummeted into darkness without end, and upon this darkness he was floating, a vagrant thought, a bottomless pain. There was no anchor, no hope. He had lost all sense of meaning or living. He wished to pass on to death, but such a mercy was not granted. He could not live without her, but here he was living, breathing and rebreathing his own stale breath against the bed covers. He began to pray for death, knowing it was a great transgression to demand. An unfamiliar rage descended upon him, a rage at the Creator who had withdrawn his beloved and yet not withdrawn his own life. The anguish fed his rage until it became a sea of blood. His temples pounded, his heart beating as if it would break through his chest. When Ram had died, it was a meaningful passing. He had been prepared. He had understood the flow of life, its coming and going, and its speaking to him from the core of himself. But to him, Ice was identical to that source. He could not fathom a life without her. Yet here he was alive, holding her delicate hand, his tears falling upon her translucent skin, which grew cold as a stone, while he sat, frozen and tense, lost and abandoned by her side. She had tried to warn him, to teach him what was to come, but his own valiant denial had shielded him from her presages. With the reality of her death starkly growing, he fell into oblivion, utterly and hopelessly, and his life lost all meaning. Finally, at dawn, he heard Rhea's frantic calls through the thick mist in his mind. Almost falling across the body, he labored to the door. Rhea looked at the glazed grief in his eyes and knew that her daughter, child of her heart, was dead. She had seen this moment when Ice was born, and she had known the Great One would not keep Ice long in this world. With the enduring strength of a woman, she held Lam's head against her shoulders and ordered Maya to give him some tea. Soon he smelled a peculiar warm liquid. Lam drank blindly and obediently as he watched Rhea prepare the inert body. Unused to medicines, Lam's sensitive body passed out into a drugged and dreamless sleep, moaning and turning in a shrunken heap beside the bed. Rhea and Ham wrapped Ice's body according to custom and prepared the cart. They awakened Lam with great difficulty and set out on the 3-hour journey to the funeral pyres on the overlook. The villagers stood at their front doors in respect, hearing the tolling bell of death. The last person to see them was Mar, who gave off a smirk as Lam, broken and exhausted, dragged his benumbed body behind the cart. Maya looked at the medicine man in a shock of recognition, remembering Lam's critical words and realizing that Lam had been right. She broke away from the funeral band and strode over to Mar, releasing her medicine bundle from the ties on her back, and dumped out its contents. Mar winced as a hard bottle of liniment hit the tender bones of his foot. Maya took a match, scraped it against his newly plastered wall, and threw it burning on top of the pile. Before Mar could even respond, she returned to the funeral march, furious, but finally purged of her vicious internship. The sun was setting behind queer yellow-gray clouds as they reached the overlook. It was midsummer, the same time Ram had died. Lam noticed nothing as he placed one foot in front of the other. He often lagged behind them, choking and heaving in his grief. Rhea and Ham stopped frequently, eyeing him with pity and concern. Lam's once ruddy complexion looked paler than the corpse they had prepared for burial. Ham was alarmed at his son-in-law. Lam had always showed himself to be noble, courageous, and high-minded, keeping to the way of reverence. Ham had been grateful for their reunion with Ram's brother. It had been a long, hard labor for Ham at the mines, and he cherished their evening talks by the hearth after dinner, with Rhea and Ice polishing stones, and Lam's colorful stories of his days with Ram. Ram's presence was strongly felt during those evenings, and Ham knew it was because of Lam's love that Ram's blessings continued to cascade in an unending waterfall upon the family. Their small band made a minimal camp at the site and waited until morning. A drizzling rain chilled them all night. They huddled together sleeplessly until morning. Lam, crazed and insulted by the rain, threw his only cape over the body to keep it dry, while Rhea and Ham tried to preserve some wood for the pyre. When Ham tried to stop Lam, his son-in-law gave him such a look of fury that Ham just left him alone and returned to his wife, who watched with apprehensive sadness. The ceremony went on with Ham presiding. Ordinarily, Lam would have guided the ritual, but his present condition precluded any active involvement. The flame leapt quietly in their hearts. Even Lam felt a second of its presence. But his frenzy and sorrow were so great, he would not allow himself to drink in its substance. Rhea and Ham felt his battle in the group's energy, but again, sadly shook their heads. Rhea held Lam's cheeks and looked into his blurry eyes before they left him on the mountain, returning to their home and their newborn grandson. Again, Lam stayed by the body for 3 days, but this time he held not to the flame, but to Ice's absence. His living death had thrown him into a great hell. Demons attacked him, poking him with hot prods, gnawing at his heels. They threw burning cold poisons at his face, haunting him with images of Ice's pain. Awakened from a fitful sleep, flailing his arms, he picked up huge timbers and slashed them in the air at his tormentors. They would flee and disperse, only to gather again as he dozed off, cackling with a cruel laughter, hurling insults and suggestions of his culpability. He began to think it was his fault that she had died. He tortured himself with thoughts that, if he had taken Maya's advice, Ice might have lived. He began to go mad. Somehow he managed to light the pyre. Somehow it burned. Somehow the prayer came to his lips. It was all he could accomplish to say the words mechanically, without love, without the fortification of the flame. While he remembered dimly how Ram's death had uplifted him, he could not recreate the moment, not even a dim glimpse. After the fire died, he smeared the ashes on his forehead again, tasted a tiny flake, and again poured the ash into Ram's pouch, still knotted around his neck with a sturdy twine. He felt a spark explode inside the pouch as the ashes mixed among themselves. A pulse of love came forth, but he shrugged it off vehemently in his misery. He did not feel worthy of the love. He had failed his brother. He had killed his wife. The next few days he gave himself no nourishment. He could not think of food. He dared not kill himself, knowing how deeply he would sin. But he prayed for death, knowing that in itself such a prayer was a sin, plunging him into a dense darkness. He began to look forward to intensifying his suffering, living on the fierce joy of masochism. He would lay in bed at night, calling forth the demons to torture him, silently watching as they thrilled at his pain. Then he remembered. Lam had never known shame. He had seen it on Lef's face after he had beaten his wife, as the chieftain stole back to Mars for another dose of opiates to gift him the relief of sleep. Yet his pride and dignity would not abandon him. He knew he was a nobleman, if for no other reason than his association with Ram and ice. He knew that he could never fall so far as Lef, turning into a pathetic, growling mongrel, snatching at scraps of life, living off the energy of others. He forced himself to return to Rhea and Ham, knowing that their love would always forgive him, even though he could not. Yes, enter, Ham bellowed impatiently, hardly able to hear. Finally, he stomped irritably over to the door and opened it as Lam fell forward. Emaciated and weightless, Lam was easy for Ham to lift into his arms. For months he lay addled and befogged. Rhea would bring a small wrapped bundle into the room, but Lam would only moan and turn his face to the wall. She stopped trying for a while, feeling it was a torment for him. "Come," the angel whispered at his bedside, more stunning than ever. The last months had only been a nightmare, he assured himself. She was still here by his side. He wanted to pull her down to him, but she shook her head silently, firmly. The flame leapt inside him, and he breathed it in. "Come, my love," Ice looked at him kindly. "You must come now." He took her hand, as resolute and delicate as ever. They walked out of his room into the semi-darkness of the house, to the room where Rhea lay sleeping with the babe at her side. Lam had never really looked at his son, the sleeping child before him, who was now almost a year. He was a splendid, strong boy, with Lam's vigorous body and Ice's long, refined fingers. "You must teach him, my darling, everything you have learned." Ice kissed Lam on the mouth, fully, passionately, the ever-rekindled love of the Great One enclosing them in the same bliss. Ancient as the origin of the world, innocent as the child who lay resting before them. Ra is the savior of the people, sent by the Great One, through us, and through our sacrifice. Ice spoke softly to Lam as he began to remember the last months of torment and torture. "Do not grieve for your shame nor your fall. It happened so you would know directly, so you will be able to teach Ra the importance of his role." Lam began to weep. His tears flowed down his face and onto her hands. Ice caught them lovingly in her cupped palms. "Ra will learn of the people's pain through you. They have flung themselves into a terrible ignorance. They will feel his empathy, as if he has experienced the inferno himself, which he has, which I have, through you." Rhea stirred in her sleep as Lam began to sob in his shame and remembrance. Ice's steady gaze lifted him, and he looked straight into her forgiving blue eyes. Passing the tears onto the baby's forehead, she murmured, "This baptism will wash away the sins of all people who return to this life of the flame through Ra. He will teach them to return to the way." She turned to Lam, wiping his forehead and cheeks with the moisture still left on her hands. Cooled and refreshed by his own tears and her touch, his muscles flexed with an old remembered fortitude. Ice kissed her husband farewell and disappeared into the ether, while Lam stared astounded into the vacant space in front of him. The baby began to awaken, while the flame in Lam rekindled in acknowledgement. The baby's ebullient squeal reverberated in the room as he gurgled in the joyous recognition of his father's dear face. Lam had returned to his side. Hands upraised to the sky, Ra gave out the roar of a baby lion, empowered to meet his life. Lam reached up to the bag of ashes around his neck, breaking the cord with one firm yank. Lifting Ra to his chest, he quickly walked outside. I understand, great waters, I finally understand, reaching the flowing river by the village. Lam flung the pouch covered with the scars and smudge of the years.